The security cameras showed an absolutely empty warehouse, but someone had just walked past me down the corridor. Let me back up to the beginning of that shift in December, when the temperature dropped to 15 below and ice covered everything outside our medical supply complex in Atlanta. I'd been on nights there 8 months, 3 warehouse buildings, 18 feeds, and a radio that mostly just crackled at static. Dave left at midnight with his usual stay warm man and a half joke about selling his soul for a space heater. Then it was just me, the blue glow of the monitors, and a dented thermos that burned my tongue. Around 1 a.m., a white unmarked van rolled up to the main gate of Building 2 and stopped, engine idling, exhaust pushing a steady cloud under the floodlight. I switched to the gate cams expecting paperwork and an apologetic driver, late pickup or whatever, but 20 minutes went by and nobody showed on any feed. No motion triggers, no doors, nothing. Just a running van in the cold. In that kind of cold, you don't sit in an unheated vehicle for long unless you're trying to die, and I kept thinking maybe the driver bailed to use a restroom and I missed it. But the only bathrooms in that direction were badge access inside Building 2. I cycled through all 18 cameras for Building 2, then the outside poles, zoomed the north and east corners in case the angle was trash, and I still saw no one. The van just sat there like a prop, engine humming steady. I layered up, parka, scarf, gloves over my uniform, grabbed my flashlight, keys, and radio, and stepped out into wind that knifed through every seam. The walk across the lot was short, but it felt like I was wading into it, boots scuffing on the salted patches because black ice was everywhere. At the van, heat blasted from the grill. I shined my light through the windshield and saw nothing, no coat, no phone mount, no coffee cup in the holder. I knocked hard and called out, "Security, anyone in there?" No answer. I checked the back doors, locked. Driver's side, unlocked, which made 0 sense. Inside, the seats were warm. The floor mats were dry like someone had just climbed out. No paperwork in the visor, no company badge on the dash. I backed out, closed the door, circled once more, and that's when I saw them. A straight trail of boot prints in the fresh powder leading from the driver's door to the service entrance of Building 2. Spaced even. Deep, like a heavier guy in work boots moving quickly. No side drift like he'd wandered. The prints were crisp, not blown in or melted, and I tracked them with the beam down to the rusted stair grate at the service entrance. I keyed my radio to dispatch, said I had an idling vehicle and possible trespass, then hustled back to the office because my hands were already going numb. Inside, I threw off the gloves and pulled up the service entrance camera. Nothing. The timestamp showed 1:27. I rewound to 1 at 8x. Still nothing. I checked the interior corridor cams. Main hall, cross corridor, break room, cold storage, the cage, empty. I flipped to a wider rewind, the past hour at high speed. Doors stayed shut, motion counters stayed at 0. It was like the guy walked straight into a wall. I scrolled back to live and stared at monitor 7, which covers the main hallway, clean, lit, a dust mop leaning by the janitor closet where it always leans. And then the picture stuttered, a full screen jitter like a bad HDMI cable, just a blink, and came back. In that blink's after image, I caught something at the far edge of frame, a shape sliding out of sight by the column, there and gone so fast I almost thought I imagined it. I rewound 10 seconds, frame stepped. The replay showed the same empty hallway, no flicker, no shape, nothing I could freeze. Adrenaline hit fast, but I forced it down because panic makes people do stupid things, and I'm paid, in part, to not do stupid things. Either someone was inside who knew the camera blind spots, there are a few if you hug the walls, or someone was actively messing with the feed. The van was no prank. The footprints were real. I scanned the other feeds again, watching for that micro judder you get when a cable's loose or a feed gets looped, but the status lights were steady green. Our system wasn't fancy, but it wasn't junk either, and nobody had my login. I caught myself listening for building sounds like the heater cycles and compressor thumps, and every normal noise sounded wrong because I was waiting for a different one. Footsteps, a door seal hiss, anything. I unhooked the flashlight from my belt, racked it to my palm so it could double as a Kubotan if it had to, clipped the radio to my jacket where the mic wouldn't snag, and called it in for real. Dispatch, Unit 4 at Med South, Building 2. I've got an occupied vehicle left running, no driver located, fresh prints to a secured door, and possible camera interference in the main hall. Requesting additional unit and police response. The dispatcher came back with the quick professional calm that either means it's nothing or we're pretending it's nothing. Copy, Unit 4. Additional en route. Police notified. I said I was going to hold the lobby to keep sightlines on monitors and doors until another guard arrived, because walking blind into an empty hallway with glitchy cameras was a good way to get laid out with a pipe, and the dispatcher said, "Understood. APD advises ETA 15. They promised to send a police unit within 15 minutes. Officers Davis and Rodriguez arrived with a K9 unit and thoroughly searched all 3 warehouse buildings, but found absolutely nothing. By then, the van had disappeared completely, leaving only a patch of melted snow on the asphalt where it had been parked. Technical analysis of the surveillance system revealed no malfunctions or signs of external tampering whatsoever. Every door and window remained locked, and none of the motion sensors had been triggered during the entire incident. The boot prints in the snow led right up to the service entrance, then just stopped on the clean pavement under the covered loading dock. The company launched an internal investigation, but couldn't determine the purpose of the visit or how someone had managed to stay invisible to 12 high-resolution cameras. They checked me first. Basic questions, timeline, whether I touched any doors or settings, whether anyone else had keys. I gave them my notebook, showed the flicker on monitor 7 that wouldn't show up on replay, pointed out the usual blind angles. Davis asked about spare key boxes. None. Rodriguez walked the dog around the dock, dumpsters, and main hall while I badged them in, and the dog didn't alert once. I told them about the warm seats and unlocked driver's door, and Rodriguez measured the stride. 11 or 12 boot, average weight, not running. When we looped back to verify the van's plate, the space was empty, only that steaming rectangle on the ground like it had just peeled out. I hadn't authorized a tow, the gate log showed no tow in or out, and dispatch confirmed nobody reported one. Now, before I explain the camera checks, you need to understand our setup isn't fancy, but we have redundancies. Locked DVR, separate power line, internal network, audit logs. Their field tech tested the coax, pulled the DVR event log, checked uptime. No drops, no unauthorized logins, no skipped frames, which made the live flicker even weirder. We tested motion with Davis waving down the main hall, recorded perfect. Rodriguez had me badge the service door open and closed 5 times, every event saved. According to the system, that door never opened between 12:45 and 2:10. By 3 a.m., the K9 had cleared all 3 buildings, including the narcotics cage and cold storage, and nothing pinged. They photographed the boot prints and cast one, which felt silly because it was so straightforward. Someone walked to a door and then didn't exist on camera. We checked the fence line for cuts, intact. We checked tire marks, only the vans, and even those were a blur from melt. Management rolled in at 6 with coffee and vendor lists, asked the same questions in corporate language, then brought their IT lead, who confirmed no tampering, no looped feeds, no errors. Every door and window stayed locked. None of the motion sensors tripped. By lunch, an internal investigation kicked off with a policy email about not approaching unknown vehicles alone, which, fair. They pulled 2 weeks of badge data and delivery schedules. Nothing matched a white unmarked van at 1 a.m. They counted every carton and seal, accounted for. APD took my formal statement and handed me a case number. Off the record, I asked Davis what he thought. He said, "Looks like a dry run," and left it at that. The incident remains completely unsolved, and I still wonder what happened that night and how someone managed to avoid detection by our entire security system. The fact that the van disappeared without a trace while I was calling for backup suggests this was planned by professionals who knew exactly what they were doing. Management reviewed all employee access records and vendor schedules, but found no legitimate reason for anyone to be there. What bothers me most is how the person seemed to know the camera blind spots perfectly, or had some way to interfere with the recordings. I've worked dozens of security jobs since then, and nothing else has made so little sense. Sometimes I still wonder if whoever it was ever came back, and whether they're still out there planning something bigger. The only thing that gave away his lie was the spotless condition of his clothes after supposedly burying his dead dog's remains. But I realized this too late, with my car window already cracked open and him standing just inches away at 4:15 a.m. on empty Maple Avenue. Let me back up to how this nightmare started. I was driving home from a brutal 12-hour shift at St. Mary's Hospital, completely drained and just wanting to collapse into bed. The roads were dead except for the occasional delivery truck, which was normal for that hour. I'd been taking the same route through that residential stretch for 2 years without incident. Cut past the shuttered laundromat, roll the stop by the school zone sign, and it's basically 5 more minutes to my apartment. That's when this guy in his 40s stepped into my high beams, work jacket and jeans, waving both arms like something was seriously wrong. I slowed because you slow. Your brain goes straight to medical emergency, and that part of me doesn't shut off even off the clock. He looked rough in the face, not dirty exactly, more wired and kind of breathless. I kept the engine running and nudged to the curb, habit drilled into me. Doors locked, park and drive, foot on brake, then cracked the window 2 inches. He planted his hands on his knees like he'd sprinted and said, "Please, I just need help. Please." All in one go. I told him to take a breath and asked what happened. He stared past me down the street like he expected someone to appear and blurted this whole thing about coming home to his dog torn apart in the yard. Coyotes or strays maybe. And he'd been trying to gather the remains to bury them behind his garage. He said there was a guy watching him from the alley, this creep in dark clothes with a shovel. And when he looked up, the guy started coming at him fast. I ditched the shovel and ran, he said, pointing vaguely back the way I'd come. I've been trying to flag anybody. His voice cracked on anybody. It sounded like something I've heard 100 times in ER triage. Panic with just enough detail. Now, before I go further, you should know I don't roll down windows for strangers at night. Not really. But I'd already done that tiny crack, and I was thinking if this guy's being chased by someone wielding a shovel, that could be a head wound waiting to happen. Stupid, maybe, but that was the calculus. I kept my phone within reach on the console, thumb hovering like I was about to dial 911, and I told him, "I can call the police." He winced like the word stung. He said he didn't want to get anyone involved, cause his neighbor's already mad about noise, and also the guy might be gone by now, and he just needed a quick ride to the main road where there were cameras. I said I'm not giving any rides, firm as I could without sounding like I was escalating things. He nodded quick, too quick, and kept glancing behind him like he was clocking blind corners. He kept talking, fast, jumpy details that sounded legit on the surface. He mentioned Morris Lane, the old blue garage with the peeling door. He even said the dirt behind the fence was frozen shallow, so he had to hack through it. Which, okay, tracks at this hour. I asked what the guy with the shovel looked like, and he said, Dark hoodie, cheap boots, smelled like gas, like he siphons it. And I got that little crawl at the back of my neck because that's a particular thing to say, you know? He leaned closer, near enough that his breath fogged the crack in the glass, thanking me, over-thanking me actually, for stopping. He kept saying, "I'm not crazy. I'm not trying anything, I swear." Which people don't usually say unless they're trying something, right? His story clicked with the dumb neighborhood chatter lately about aggressive packs of strays. 2 nurses on my unit had their trash torn up last week, so my brain was trying to reconcile that with what I was seeing. He had a work jacket, heavy-duty type, and jeans, but the jacket was spotless. Like, not a speck. No mud, no hair, nothing to suggest he'd been gathering, as he said, pieces of a dog or digging in wet dirt. Even his boots were clean, road dust sure, but no clumps. I felt my foot press harder on the brake. He noticed me looking, and his eyes flicked down like he suddenly remembered he was supposed to be a mess. I kept my tone light, nurse voice, the one that smooths ruffled feathers, and said, "If you were dealing with all that, where are your gloves? Or, why's your jacket so clean?" I made it sound like a practical question, like I could hand him wipes and fix it. That's when everything shifted. The breathless act drained out of him like someone closed a valve. His face went flat. Calm. Empty. Calm. He didn't blink for a beat, and then smiled without his eyes, which is the smile people use right before they demand narcotics or start throwing punches. Maple Avenue felt louder suddenly, even though it was silent. He lowered his voice and said, steady and almost bored, "You're observant." He tilted his head, taking his time, and added, "Too bad that won't help you now." I swallowed because my mouth went dry, and I flicked my thumb to the lock button without taking my eyes off him, double-checking I'd locked it even though I already had. He watched my hand, and then glanced down the street one more time like he was confirming we were alone. "You're gonna unlock the door," he said, conversational, like we were talking about the weather. I didn't answer. He set his palm flat on the door below the window, fingers splayed like he was measuring where to grab. Then he shifted his stance, braced his feet, and stepped closer to my car door. That's when I realized I'd walked straight into a trap. This wasn't some random victim seeking help. This was a predator who'd carefully rehearsed his story to lure in good Samaritans like me. His hand moved toward my door handle as he continued talking in that eerily calm voice about how sorry he was that I'd figured it out. I said, "Nope," more to myself than him, and slammed my foot on the gas. The car lurched, front tires chirped on the cold asphalt, and his palm slid off the metal as I shot forward. He didn't yell. He didn't run. He just pivoted smoothly, like he'd expected this outcome too. And in my rear view I watched him step to the center line and raise a phone like he was checking reception. He tapped fast, glanced up once, then to the right, like he was signaling someone I couldn't see. That's when my stomach dropped. This was a routine, polished and tested, and I'd slotted right into the mark position. I stayed on Maple because it fed straight to the highway, shortest path to cameras, lights, other people, and I kept exactly the speed limit so I wouldn't give a cop a reason to stop me and hand me right back into a dark shoulder. I flicked my hazards once to wake up any sleepy drivers ahead and kept scanning the side streets. A sedan's headlights flared 2 blocks back and then went dark, like it had nosed out of a driveway and changed its mind. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. I killed my interior lights with a thumb press so the cabin wasn't lit up like a fish tank. Every block I passed, I checked the cross streets for movement. Nothing. But that can mean nothing or everything at that hour. He hadn't chased. He didn't need to. If there were others, all they had to do was be where I'd be in 60 seconds. I rolled the window up the rest of the way. Should have done that sooner. Double-checked the doors, and kept my phone in my lap with my emergency screen pulled up, not calling yet because I needed 2 hands and both eyes to not plow into a light pole while narrating my location to a dispatcher. A 4-way stop came up. I didn't do the California roll. I stopped hard, counted 1, 2, and went. Because if they were timing me, they'd expect either panic speed or a freeze, not something boring and exact. A box truck turned onto Maple ahead and I tucked in behind it, using its bulk as moving cover. The truck's brake lights were an ugly comfort, proof of another human between us. 2 more turns and I'd hit the on-ramp. At the last residential intersection, I saw a figure at the far corner, hood up, hands in pockets, head angled like he was listening. He didn't step out, he didn't wave, he didn't even look my way, just existed in that weird too-still way people get when they're waiting for a cue. I eased past, eyes straight, and merged onto the highway like it was any other dawn. Once I hit 55 and the median opened up, I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. In my mirror, Maple shrank to a dark line with 1 pinprick of light where a phone screen glowed and then winked out. I drove straight home with my doors locked and my hands shaking so bad I had to re-grip the wheel at every light. And only after I was inside, chain on, deadbolt turned, did the full weight of it all land in a way that wasn't helpful. Like my brain was replaying each second for how I'd given him an opening by cracking that window in the first place. I kept turning over the phone in his hand, and the way he didn't try to force anything because why would he? If there were eyes on other corners, if they'd done this before, because tired healthcare workers and night shift people are predictable. Same routes, same hours, same empty streets. I reported it the next day with everything I remembered. Street names, timestamp on my clock, the jacket cut, the way he said, "You're gonna unlock the door." And the officer took it seriously, but said without plates, video, or other victims, there wasn't much to pursue, and maybe a patrol car would roll through Maple more often. I changed my route home and I don't stop anymore. Not for waving arms, not for stories, not for anything that can be handled by a call and a location. 'Cause I keep replaying one detail I almost missed. His clothes were clean, impossibly clean. And if I hadn't noticed, if I'd hit unlock on reflex the way people do to be polite, then what? What hallway would I have been dragged down? What trunk? What ditch? So I don't test it. I just don't. It happened 2 years ago when I was working as an on-site IT technician for small businesses around Houston. Tuesday evening, I was supposed to finish at 6, but at 5:40 we got an urgent call about server issues at some accounting firm. The client claimed their entire system had crashed, and they had an important audit first thing in the morning. I didn't want to take the call, but my dispatcher insisted it was a legitimate emergency from a company in our database. The address was only 15 minutes away in a familiar business district, so I reluctantly agreed. As I was driving there, they called back saying there had been an address mix-up and gave me a completely different location. The new address was 45 minutes away in the opposite direction, out in an industrial area on the edge of town. I wanted to cancel, but dispatch said the client would pay extra and confirmed the company was in our system. Finally, I reached the address, a 2-story office building with dark windows and not a single car in the lot. I tried the main door, but it was locked, and nobody answered the intercom when I buzzed. I called dispatch to double-check, and she said, "They're expecting you. Try their main line if no one's at the door." When I called the client number, it went straight to an out-of-service message, which hadn't happened earlier. Walking around the building, I found the service entrance slightly open, pitch black inside. I called out, "IT here," then lit the threshold with my phone. Bare concrete, a pallet, a spill of cable ties. I didn't step in. I let the door settle like I'd never touched it. For context, if a company is truly down, there's always a named contact who keeps a line open for access. This one had a generic reception number, which was wrong for after hours. I checked the work order, then called dispatch again and asked her to read the street number slowly. She did, sounded impatient, said, "Same as before," and told me to take pictures for the file if no one showed. I headed back to my car to leave a note, and that's when I noticed a middle-aged guy in work clothes standing by my driver door, peering in. Ball cap, paint-splattered pants, windbreaker, no tools, no badge, no vehicle. "Hey, what are you doing?" I called out. He looked up with this intense stare but didn't respond. I said, "You with building management?" and kept the hood between us. He finally said, "You lost?" Flat. I told him the company name, said I was here on a support call, asked if anyone was inside. He didn't look at the building. He watched my bag. "What's in there?" "Tools," I said, trying to keep it light. He stepped closer anyway, slow like he had all night. I could see a grease mark on his sleeve. He asked what route I took, if anyone else was coming, if I had a key. I said, "My office knows I'm here," which was true, and they'll call if I don't check in. He smiled without showing teeth and said, "You parked wrong. Trucks swing wide." There were no trucks. The lot was empty. I hit the remote unlock to make a point. He didn't flinch. I glanced toward the service door and saw it was closed now, flush, like someone had pulled it shut while I was talking. That was when it went from weird to not safe. "I'm going to reschedule and come back with access," I said, moving toward my door with my phone visible. He drifted just enough to put himself between me and the handle, not touching me, just there. "Excuse me," I said. He stared at my lanyard when I lifted it and didn't read it, just watched my hands. My anxiety spiked and I decided I needed to get out of there immediately. I kept my wrist steady, hit unlock again, tossed the bag onto the passenger seat without leaning in, and met his eyes. The man slowly backed away from my car but kept watching me with this predatory expression. I slid in, hit the lock, and started the engine. No fumbling, just key, turn, dash lights. Then in the backup cam, I caught two more guys cutting the corner of the building fast. One of them started shouting and windmilling his arms like I should stop or roll down, which made everything click. This wasn't a weird misunderstanding. This was a setup, and I didn't need to argue with anybody. The first guy stepped behind my bumper and raised his hands like he was calming a dog, but the lot was wide open and I wasn't boxed, so I cranked the wheel and threw it in reverse, hard. He tried to pace me, but I kept the car moving, slow enough not to hit him, fast enough he had to hop sideways, and when I had the angle, I slammed it into drive and punched it. Somebody yelled, "Hey!" like a command, and something clacked off my rear quarter, maybe a bolt or a small rock. I didn't wait to find out. I took the exit to the access road without signaling, mirror full of all three of them running like they had a plan that just broke, and once I hit the main drag, I held it at 5 over and didn't look back until I had taillights around me and a gas station canopy up ahead. I pulled under the lights, parked facing the street, and called 911. I kept it simple. Name, company, the address I'd been sent to, the 3 males, the open service door that had been closed, the disconnected number, and that there were no other cars or signage. The dispatcher asked, "Are you safe right now?" And I said yes, public place, other people around. She asked if anyone brandished a weapon. I said no, but one tried to block my car, and they were clearly coordinating. She logged it as suspicious persons and a possible attempted robbery. While I was on the line, I texted my dispatcher. "Leaving site. Call PD. Possible setup." She pinged back immediately. "Call me." I called her and she sounded thrown off for the first time that night, swore she'd double-checked the ticket source and told me to wait for an officer to call me back. An officer did, within 10 minutes, asked me to meet at the substation a mile away. I drove straight over and gave a full statement, every name and timestamp from the work order, showed them the call history and the lock screen photo of the building number. They sent a patrol to the industrial lot while I sat with a sergeant who knew the area. He said the building had had squatters off and on, copper thieves too, and that the vacant stuff out there got used for all kinds of side business after dark. "You did the right thing leaving," he said, writing down my plate and our office number. I powered down the job in our system as no access safety concern and sent the incident report linked to my manager. By morning, detectives had pulled the basics. The accounting firm name was legit, but their actual office was in a medical plaza across town. They had not called us, and their servers were fine. The phone number on our ticket pinged as a VoIP that had been disconnected. The address I drove to had been vacant for 3 years. Current owner a bank in foreclosure proceedings, utilities off, no tenants. Patrol found the service door unlatched again, but no one inside, just trash and a couple of busted chairs. Detectives told me they'd seen this pattern with contractor lures hitting plumbers and appliance techs. Mostly, use a known company name to make it feel routine, pull the tech somewhere quiet, then take tools, take the van, or worse if someone resists. They asked if I'd been followed. I hadn't. They asked if we'd had other odd calls. I didn't know. Our company's security team got involved fast because the job had been opened through our normal system, not a random email. They pulled access logs, compared IPs, and found the ticket created from an external portal we used for after-hours submissions, with the right customer ID, but the wrong callback. The theory was that someone had scraped business names and IDs from an old PDF we'd published years ago. There was talk about cached pages and public-facing artifacts, and then guessed the portal format well enough to slide a ticket in that looked right until you inspected the fields. The company locked the portal down that same day, switched to call-only after-hours with PIN verification, and pushed a policy update. No after-hours site entry without a live voice on the client side, and a named contact who meets you at the door, period. I still think about the timing. The way the door was open, then closed. The way he watched my bag and not my badge. And I play the what-ifs. What if I'd stepped inside to just look? What if I'd tried to argue? What if a truck had actually pulled in behind me? But mostly I keep it boring now. I check the callback twice. I call from the lot before I get out. And I leave if anything's off. 'Cause whatever they wanted that night, tools, the car, maybe me, it wasn't worth finding out. So when I was 20, I was driving back to Indiana from college in Illinois after winter break. It was around midnight on I-64, and I hadn't seen another car for over an hour in this really desolate stretch between Evansville and Terre Haute. I was switching radio stations when I noticed this big rig coming up behind me in my mirrors. At first, everything seemed normal, just a trucker doing his job. He moved into the left lane to pass me, which is totally standard. But then something weird happened. Instead of completing the pass, he slowed down and matched my speed, staying right alongside my Honda. I thought maybe he was having engine trouble or something. Like he was trying to listen for a noise or keep an eye on a tire. I don't know. I'm not a mechanic. So I eased off a little to give him space, expecting him to either fall back or go on. He didn't. He hung there, and I started to feel boxed in. Concrete barrier to my left for a stretch, guardrail to the right, and him sitting on my driver's side like a wall. I tapped my brakes to see if he'd move ahead. He tapped his too, or maybe just coasted, because we dropped together. I sped up a notch to drift behind him. Nothing. He mirrored me. Perfect timing, like we were tied together with a rope. Okay, maybe he's tired, I told myself. Maybe he's zoning out. I'd heard that happens. so I hit my blinker and slid right to make it simple for him to finish his pass. He drifted right with me. Same lane, same place. Then nudged back out left without actually going anywhere. I said out loud, "What are you doing?" And my voice sounded small in the car. Then this incredibly bright spotlight suddenly blazed from the side of his cab, aimed directly into my car. The light was so intense I had to shield my eyes with my hand, and I couldn't see anything except white glare. My dash lit up like someone had welded a sun onto my door. I ducked behind the A-pillar, one eye squinted, trying to keep the wheels straight because at 70 mph, you don't have much margin for being blind. This went on for several minutes, long enough that I started counting mile markers just to stay oriented, before he finally turned it off and completed his pass. I figured it had to be some kind of equipment malfunction, or maybe he was checking his trailer or something. I wanted a normal reason so bad. I let him get a couple car lengths ahead and moved to the left lane to put more distance between us. The truck immediately changed lanes too and pulled up next to me again. That's when the spotlight came back on, even brighter this time, pinning me in the lane like a bug on glass. I could see the beam was mounted behind his window, not a handheld flashlight. Deliberate, like the kind of thing you'd use to scan a yard, and he aimed it right into my face. I threw my visor down, crouched in my seat, and tried to keep my tires centered between the reflectors. "Cut it out!" I yelled, which was useless obviously, but it felt like doing something. I nudged my speed down to tuck behind him. He matched. I bumped up to swing past on the right. He slid right in perfect sync, light dead on. There was no way this was accidental. The road around us was empty, no exit, no shoulder wide enough to stop without feeling like a target, just dark trees and those little green signs ticking by. Now I knew for sure this wasn't any accident or mechanical issue. This guy was deliberately targeting me, and I had no idea why. I tried to outrun him, pushing my little Honda up to 85 mph, faster than I'd ever driven in my life. The engine whined, and I had both hands at 10 and 2 because I could feel the car get light over those slight rises. And the last thing I wanted was to overcorrect and spin out. But this massive 18-wheeler caught up to me like I was standing still. He had to be doing 90 easy, on that road, at that hour, and he slid up along my driver's side again like he owned the lane. I flicked my blinker to fake a lane change, then swerved the other way to try to shake him. Stupid maybe, but I was thinking smaller moves, not anything dumb. He read it, like he'd seen that trick 100 times, and flowed with me, huge and smooth, no brake squeal, no wobble. The speed he was maintaining was absolutely terrifying, way beyond what should be safe for a vehicle that size. I caught a quick look at the trailer wheels in my mirror. Solid, no wobble, no smoke, and then the light hit me again. He pulled alongside me again and hit me with that spotlight, holding it steady while matching my speed perfectly. My only advantage was maneuverability, so I tapped my brakes first to test his reaction. Then I hit them hard and let the nose dive, hazards flashing because I wanted him to assume emergency, not strategy. And I dropped back behind him, tucking tight under the tail of the trailer where he couldn't see me in his mirrors. The light swept the lane ahead of him like he'd lost target, but I was glued to his ICC bumper, counting the rivets and watching the mud flaps stutter. And I stayed there, breathing through my mouth, because if he braked for real, I'd have to choose ditch or impact. But I figured he wasn't going to slam on for no reason at that speed. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand I'd driven that stretch a dozen times, and there's this exit with a single gas station perched right off the ramp, a rectangle of fluorescent light you can see from the highway. And I knew if I could make that turn without him seeing me peel off, I'd have a shot. I saw the blue sign for services pop up, fuel, food, open 24 hours, and I edged even closer, feeling the air pull at the hood from his draft, just waiting for the mile marker that matched the exit in my head. He drifted a little, like he was scanning, and I kept my wheel straight, speedometer at 75, and I committed to the plan, because dragging this out on an empty road was asking to lose. When the actual exit split started, that chevron pattern, I waited until the very last second, right when his cab cleared the gore point, and I snapped on my blinker and broke right. A clean, decisive move, crossing the hash into the ramp, and instantly the sound changed. The road surface rumbled, and his trailer wall filled my left window for a heartbeat, and then was gone. He couldn't react fast enough at that angle, and he went flying past on the main highway, taillights shrinking, and I rode the ramp hard, let the car scrub speed, and took the curve into the lot with the gas station canopy throwing hard white light on concrete. I rolled to a stop at the outer pump, but didn't get out, just killed my headlights and left the engine running in case I had to move, watching the highway slice by beyond the fence. I waited 30 seconds, a minute, 5, expecting to see him circle back on the overpass or shoulder crawl the frontage road, but nothing moved except a distant sedan that didn't exit. I eased around the pumps and parked in a slot with my rear to a wall and my nose pointed at the only way out, and I locked the doors and finally let myself look at my phone. I sat in that gas station parking lot for almost an hour, hands still shaking, trying to process what had just happened. But I kept breaking it down into steps because steps are easier. Brake, tuck, exit, hide. And every few minutes I looked up at the highway to make sure there wasn't a truck pacing the fence. I called campus security at my school to report it, figuring they'd at least document it and maybe tell me who to call. But the dispatcher sounded apologetic and said there wasn't much they could do since it happened in another state, and she suggested I call the highway patrol there if I had the plate number. I didn't. I couldn't even see the state. I went inside to buy water. I didn't want just to talk to a person, and the attendant, a guy in his 30s with a name tag that said Mike, listened while he counted a drawer and he was like, "Yeah, truckers get weird sometimes. Long hours, bad day, or they think somebody cut them off, or they fixate. Especially on solo drivers, you know? Could be road rage, could be some creeper, could be both." And I told him about the spotlight, and he said he'd seen rigs with mounted work lights, and that some use them to mess with people, 'cause they're bored or pissed. He suggested I wait longer to make sure the guy was long gone before getting back on the interstate, and he pointed at the camera domes and said, "You can park where they see you, right there. Big blind spot behind the ice machine, don't use that one." I moved the car under a camera, texted my roommate that I'd be late and not to freak, and I scrolled maps for alternate routes like maybe county roads could thread me home without touching the interstate. They couldn't, not meaningfully. After 45 minutes, I stepped outside again and checked the highway, counted to 100, no big rigs exiting, and I decided I'd take the ramp westbound and then loop east 2 exits later, add some randomness. When I finally pulled out, I kept my distance from any trucks I could see, and I held steady speeds and never sat parallel with anyone, and the rest of the drive was quiet in that way, where quiet makes you nervous because you're waiting for the moment it ends. To this day, I have no idea what that driver's intentions were, and maybe it was just some idiot on a power trip. But the part that stuck with me wasn't even the light or the speed. It was how easy it was for someone that big to pick me, lock on, and make every normal choice bad, and I still catch myself checking my mirrors for a spotlight that isn't there. During my sophomore year at college, I was working part-time as an assistant manager at Henderson's Antiques on Main Street. Mr. Henderson trusted me to close up on Thursdays when he drove to estate sales in neighboring towns. That particular evening I was working alone, cataloging a new shipment of vintage clocks and porcelain pieces. Around 9 p.m., someone knocked on the front door, even though we'd closed an hour earlier. Through the glass I could see a woman in her 40s wearing a dark coat pointing at our hours sign. I walked over and explained through the door that we were closed until 10 a.m. tomorrow. She nodded with understanding and walked away from the storefront, but instead of leaving, she headed into the narrow alley between our shop and the adjacent building. I stood there with the key ring still in my hand, kinda watching her reflection in the glass longer than I needed to, because the alley isn't a cut-through unless you know where you're going. Trash bins, a metal door for deliveries, the staircase that leads to the storage loft. So I tapped the door once like, "Sorry," and flipped the deadbolt again just to be sure. The lights in the showroom were on but dim since I'd killed the front row of lamps to keep the temperature even for the silverware. And the only other light was the backroom fluorescent that buzzed when it felt like it. It's dumb, but I remember thinking she must live nearby and just didn't want to walk the block around in the drizzle. It had been spitting rain all afternoon, so I told myself it was nothing and went back to the intake table. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand that Henderson's has this old alarm panel that arms only when every door is latched right, and the rear exit's latch sticks unless you push it in and back. Mr. H showed me that trick. Heel your palm and bump it. So part of closing was checking that door twice. I'd already done it once. I told myself that, took a breath, and pulled open another box. The shipment that night was estate jewelry rolled in tissue, IDs hand-scribbled on masking tape. I was sorting rings and cufflinks, trying to match numbers to the pencil ledger, kinda zoning out in that way you do when you count too long. 20 minutes, maybe 30, passed like that. I heard a car kick down the street, then everything fell quiet again, and the only sound was the old wall clock ticking. The first creak from the showroom was small enough that I chalked it up to settling. Our floors talk when the humidity shifts. But then there was another, then a third, spaced apart like steps. I paused halfway through a lot of brooches, listening. When I eased the storage room door open, the corridor of cases gave me a long mirror view. Watch display, silver cabinet, the tall mahogany jewelry case with the brass lock. She was there. The same woman from the door, moving slow, precise, like she had a map I didn't, pausing at the sterling service sets, then at the velvet trays, scanning. No smashed glass, no panic, just this careful glide, one hand trailing the case edges like she was measuring. My stomach did that cold drop. How did she even get inside? And I stepped back so she couldn't see me in the reflection. I should have hit the alarm immediately. That's what you're gonna say, and you'd be right. But it's a weird thing when you're the only person between a store full of consignments and a stranger who clearly doesn't mind trespassing. I thumbed my phone out of my pocket, trying to get 911 ready without looking down too much, 'cause I wanted eyes on her. She reached the case where we keep the Victorian mourning pins, tiny locks of hair, jet settings, stuff that sells fast if it's real. And she wasn't browsing, she was confirming. She tapped the glass with her nail, one precise click, then move on. I realized the rear exit must have been her way in. If the latch didn't catch, the alarm wouldn't know, and I felt stupid for trusting my first check. "Hey," I said, not loud, just enough to test the distance. She didn't flinch, so I tried again, louder this time. "Ma'am, we're closed," which sounded ridiculous the second it left my mouth. She turned her head a fraction but kept moving, and that was somehow worse than if she'd run. I took one step back to where the landline sits on the file cabinet because the cell reception's trash near the safe, and my elbow caught a plastic sorter full of junk drawer finds, old keys, brass buttons, loose bezels. The thing tipped and dumped like a handful of coins thrown at a wall. The crash ricocheted off the cases. She spun, fast, eyes on me like a level line drawn across the room. Calm, calculating, not surprised. We just stared for a beat that felt way too long. No screaming. No, don't move. Just that cool assessment, and for a second I actually thought she might talk. Instead, she cut left and broke into a run. It was clean, no flailing, just a straight sprint toward the back, the kind you only see when someone trains for it. I moved too, on instinct more than bravery, cutting through the narrow aisle by the clocks, shoulder-skimming oak. "Stop! Hey, stop!" I heard myself say, which was useless, and I hated how it sounded. I cleared the corner as she hit the service hallway. She already had the rear bar depressed before I could grab her coat sleeve. Fingers brushed wool, that close, and the door yawned into cold air. I chased her into the alley. The motion light over the loading pad flicked on late, making everything stutter. She was gone past the stack of shipping crates, footsteps light, then nothing. No engine, no shout. Just wet pavement and the echo of that door clicking shut behind me. I stood there for half a second because it felt dumb to sprint into a blind alley after someone who'd just proven she knew the building better than me, then doubled back to secure the exit. Phone finally pressed to my ear, breath too loud in the receiver as the dispatcher said hello and asked for the address. I pushed the door closed, set the bar, then looked at the hardware because I needed to see something concrete. Something I could tell the cops without sounding like an idiot who missed a latch. The strike plate was clean. No splinters, no pry marks. The cylinder looked untouched except for a faint crescent on the face where a tool might have slipped once and kissed the metal. There was a little curl of shaved brass sitting on the threshold like a comma. I picked it up and felt that stupid cold drop again. The kind that cuts through adrenaline and leaves you plain, practical facts. The back door lock had been picked with professional precision, not forced or broken. Tiny metal shavings on the floor showed where she'd used specialized tools to defeat the deadbolt without damaging it. I held one between my fingers while I gave the dispatcher our address. Then I called Mr. Henderson and said, "I locked it, I swear." And he just said to stay inside and wait for the police. The woman was gone. Our alley turns left behind the print shop and right behind the tailor, and then it breaks into a service lot. So if you know the turns, you can vanish in 30 seconds. 2 patrol cars rolled up fast, lights off, and the officers split. One checked the alley with a flashlight. The other took my statement and asked me to show him every door and window. We did a walkthrough. No glass disturbed, nothing wedged. The rear strike plate had that shine and those shavings. That was it. When Mr. Henderson arrived, out of breath and still in his jacket from the estate sale, we went straight to inventory. We opened the big cases first. The silver cabinet, the Victorian pins, the high-dollar rings. Everything was there, and weirdly that made it worse because it meant she'd been hunting for something specific, not just grabbing and running. Mr. H said, she wasn't shopping, she was verifying, and I could tell he was cycling through our recent consignments. He looked at the ledger and tapped a finger on 3 items we'd only just logged. A gold cigarette case with an inscription, a mourning brooch with a hairwork compartment, and a small travel clock with a hidden compartment that the seller mentioned offhand. He'd joked about it when he dropped it off. Inside knowledge, probably. Not random. The officers canvassed the block. They asked the pizza place, the bar with the neon sign, the print shop. Nobody saw anyone matching her. One officer crouched by the back door and said, matter of fact, clean pick. And I felt my face go hot, even though he wasn't blaming me. They dusted the case edges and the door hardware and got nothing readable, just smudges. On the floor by the service hallway were 2 faint partial shoe prints in the dust, narrow tread, probably a running shoe. The officer wrote the case number on a card and told us to keep everything as we found it and to call if we remembered anything else, even if it felt dumb. Mr. Henderson pulled the intake sheets for the 3 items he suspected and went through who knew about them. Me, obviously. Him, the seller, whose info was on file. No photos posted yet. We hadn't put them on the website. He rubbed his jaw and asked me to think hard if I'd mentioned the clock or the brooch to anyone. I said no, because I hadn't, and he nodded like he believed me, which helped, not emotionally, just in practical terms, because it meant our list of leaks was tight. He locked those items in the safe, then looked at the rear latch, then back at me, and said we were changing procedures before we reopened. Forensic analysis confirmed the lock had been opened with a professional pick set, indicating someone with serious criminal experience. A detective called me 2 days later and asked me to come in, said they were connecting our incident to a string of similar antique shop burglaries in 2 nearby towns. Same method, same thing where nothing was taken if the target item wasn't present or visible. He slid photos across the table, close-ups of scratch patterns on other doors, the same crescent marks, the same tiny brass curls on thresholds. It was like a signature without being one. Our woman's identity wasn't established. No prints, no DNA. The detective said, "You gotta look at her face." And I said yes, and gave the best description I could, but no matches came back. Security cameras on our street didn't cover the alley, and the city traffic cam on Main caught a dark coat moving fast past the Taylor's sign, but the frame skipped, and the image blurred at the exact second she turned. We pulled our old indoor footage and got reflections and shadows and my own dumb silhouette knocking things over. Nothing usable. Mr. Henderson had a locksmith out that afternoon. We installed an updated alarm, a sensor on the rear latch that screams if it's even a hair off, reinforced plates, and an additional camera pointed straight down the service hall. He also changed how we log consignments, tightened who sees what before it goes in the case, delayed any talk about hidden compartments until after we verify and secure. I'm still amazed by her composure and how she worked like she'd done it dozens of times, because she probably had. And I still think about the way she tapped the glass like she was checking a list, and about how we only noticed her because of a noise I made, and how close she got to whatever she was after. Sometimes when I close, I check the morning pins and that travel clock twice without meaning to, and I listen for that creak, and I wonder if she came back and decided the risk wasn't worth it, or if she's still out there waiting for the exact piece to surface and for someone to get careless for 1 second, which, honestly, is all it took. During the summer of 2019, I was home from Ohio State staying with my parents in rural Kentucky. The main entertainment out there was driving the back roads late at night, just cruising and listening to music. One night in August, I decided to check out this old abandoned amusement park called Sunset Valley that closed in the 90s. It was about a 30-minute drive down County Road 47 through dark fields and tree lines. The park still had old rides and pavilions sitting there rotting, which made for a cool but creepy destination. I'd been there a couple times before during the day with friends, but never alone at night, so I left around 11 with a full tank and a half-charged phone, figuring I'd loop it and be back before anyone noticed. The entrance was a sagging chain-link gate with a bent post you could slip around if you hugged the drainage ditch. I eased the Pontiac in and crept the cracked loop road, headlights washing over a faded carousel roof and ticket windows with the glass kicked out. I killed the music to listen for any other engine. Nothing. Just the fan humming and water dripping off leaves. Now, before I explain what happened later, you need to know I'd posted a couple Instagram stories from here that week and stupidly tagged the location. A few guys I barely knew DM'd asking if it was really open at night. I ignored them, but sitting there alone, that felt like I'd basically broadcast an unlocked spot and the fact I like to wander around in it. A tornado had blown through the area the day before, knocking down trees, and one of them was sprawled across the loop road right before the exit. I tried to turn around on the soaked grass and immediately buried the rear wheels. The tires just spun no matter how gentle or hard I pressed the gas. I tried rocking it, then shoved a floor mat under the tire. No traction, just mud slung up the quarter panel. I called my parents, and they said the nearest tow could get there in about 2 hours since we were in the middle of nowhere. I locked the doors and decided to wait. I wasn't sleeping, so I kept the hazards on and checked my phone even though the signal bar kept blinking in and out like it was teasing me. By 12:10, I'd killed the headlights to save the battery and let the hazards tick. They reflected off the ticket windows, so it looked like eyes blinking at me. Rain came and went in light spit showers that didn't help anything. Every few minutes a branch cracked deeper in the park, and I told myself it was storm damage settling. A raccoon waddled past my bumper and stared like I was the idiot. I thought about hiking to the highway, but the mud was slick, the night was black, and the last thing I needed was some farmer calling the sheriff about a trespasser. Staying put made sense, so I cracked the window 2 inches, kept the keys in the ignition, and watched the mirror for headlights. Around 1 a.m., I finally heard an engine and figured the tow truck had arrived early. But instead of a tow truck, an old Chevrolet Suburban with dark tinted windows came around the bend. It rolled past slow, circled my stuck Pontiac like it was reading a label, then stopped about 50 yards away facing me. The engine cut. The headlights went dark. No dome light. Just a dark rectangle of a truck parked on an angle like it wanted a view. Someone was definitely inside. There was that slight shift you notice when weight moves. But they didn't open a door or honk or anything. I tried calling my parents back, and the screen immediately flashed, "No service." I put the hazards back on, flashed my high beams twice, and waited. Nothing. I didn't want to step out and lose what little leverage the locked doors gave me, so I sat still and watched the windshield. I couldn't see inside because of the tinted windows, but I knew someone was there. After more than 30 minutes of sitting there with my hazards clicking and that Suburban just parked like a dead thing, it suddenly cranked back to life. No warning. A quick cough of the starter and then it rolled forward slow, eased past my bumper without stopping, and drifted out the way it had come, like whoever was inside had just changed their mind or gotten bored or decided I wasn't worth it. I waited another 5 minutes because I didn't want to step into anything if they just pulled around the pavilion to double back. Then I heard a different engine, heavier, and actual amber strobes cut through the trees, and I finally let out a breath I didn't know I was holding because it looked exactly like a county tow, boxy and beat up. And the guy hopped down with a reflective vest and a Reds cap and said, "You the Pontiac?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm Rick," like we were at a cookout. I asked if he'd seen another truck, an old Suburban, tinted up, and he shrugged and said, "Nope. I came from 47, didn't pass a soul." Which didn't make sense unless that Suburban had taken the service road behind the picnic shelters or cut the field. But I wasn't about to start wandering around pointing at tire tracks in the dark. Rick looked at the tree across the loop and said, "You tried to turn on this soup? She's gonna fight you." Then he laid down in the mud without complaining and slid the hook to the rear tow point like he'd done it 1,000 times, which he probably had. I kept my door cracked so I could hear him, and he told me to put it in neutral, hands off the wheel, light throttle when he said so. He worked the winch, metal creaked, the Pontiac shifted, the rear end popped out with a wet sucking sound, and then I had traction again. While he coiled the cable, I kept glancing back down the road because the whole time I was waiting for those dark windows to show up in my mirror, like they'd been watching to see if I was alone, and now they'd be mad I wasn't. We got moving quick. Rick said, "Follow my tail, don't stop till the gate," in a tone that made me listen. We eased around the fallen tree, his rig taking the dry line, my car basically copying his path. And when we got to the gap by the bent post, he hopped out, swung the chain link back enough for me to squeeze through, then jogged to his cab. On County Road 47, the blacktop felt solid, and the draw of the main highway lights a mile past the silo felt like an actual plan. I kept expecting those square headlights to pop out behind a hedgerow and settle on my back bumper, but it was just us and a far-off set of tractor lamps. Rick radioed something to dispatch, casual, like client out, back to shop. and didn't mention anything weird, and that somehow made me feel stupid for being jumpy, but also safer. Like if this was unusual, he would have said so. At the gas station by the junction, he waved out his window and said I was good. Cost was on my parents' card already, and I thanked him twice. I got home at 2:30 and parked nose in under the porch light and left my muddy shoes by the door, and that should have been the end of it. But I didn't sleep much because I kept replaying how that Suburban had just sat there without doing anything, which was almost worse than if they'd just driven on. A few days later, I mentioned it to a deputy sheriff I knew through my dad's work. He handled rural calls and everyone knew him as the guy who could tell you which road flooded first. And I told him the whole thing straight, no exaggeration. The tree, the mud, the weight, the Suburban, the tow. He didn't smile or tell me kids spook themselves. He just asked what time, which direction the truck came from, if I caught any part of the plate, no, and if they flashed lights or tried the door, no, and I could tell he was running it against something he'd already heard. He said, "We've had reports on 47 and 19 and out by the quarries. Group in an older SUV, different colors, sometimes a van, watching stranded vehicles, then closing in when they're sure the driver's alone or gets out to wave down help." He said they don't always hit, they test first, see if someone's on the way, and if another vehicle shows up quick they peel off. But if it's just one person with a dead battery or flat or stuck, they move fast, doors open, 3 guys, sometimes 4, not amateurs. "We've been trying to catch them for months," he said, "but they're patient and they know the cut-throughs. You probably looked like more trouble than you were worth. Young guy. Hazards on. Someone clearly coming." I asked why not just roll up and play Good Samaritan first, and he said that's part of the trick sometimes. But the storm had knocked out a lot of cameras out there, and the park is a blind spot, and they like blind spots. He told me to log it anyway, in case it helps the pattern, and to keep a real tow number saved, not just Google, and to never tag locations in real time, which stung a bit, but he wasn't wrong. I didn't go back to Sunset Valley, and after that, I stopped doing solo night drives in the empty parts. Not because I thought I was special or targeted, just because I understood I'd sat in a place someone else used like a net, and the only reason nothing happened is because I had a clock on me and they saw it. I was a junior in medical school and used to run the bike path through Riverdale Park in downtown Portland almost every evening. As a student, I preferred training after classes when the day's heat died down, and there were usually enough cyclists and other runners around even late in the evening. That October evening, I started my usual 5-kilometer route along the river around 7 p.m., just as the sun was setting behind the trees. About a kilometer in, I noticed a dark pickup truck driving slowly on the parallel park road. The driver was obviously watching me through his open window, which immediately made me uncomfortable. I kept running, hoping the truck would just pass by, but it maintained the same crawling speed as my jogging pace. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand I wasn't careless about safety. I wore a reflective vest, my phone was in an armband with the emergency slider ready, and I had 3 bailout points to populated areas. I told myself not to overreact, but when he drifted closer at the next clearing and the window stayed down despite the cold air, I cut my music and listened to his engine pacing me. Why would someone do that for no reason? I tried a test. I slowed like I had a stitch. He slowed too. I passed the faded mile marker stencil and thought about ducking through the dog park gate, then changed my mind. Locked after dusk, and I didn't want to fumble with a latch in front of a stranger. I palmed my runner's alarm, the cheap kind that screams when you pull a pin, and slid it under my thumb so he couldn't see it. I also clocked a dent on his bumper and a partial plate as the taillight flickered. Details help later if things go sideways. That's what my dad always said. When the path curved left toward the footbridge over the creek, the truck also turned onto a side road, keeping me in sight. There was only one man in the cab wearing a baseball cap, and he was blatantly staring at me while ignoring other vehicles honking behind him. I picked up my pace and took the trail branch that led into the denser part of the park. To my alarm, the pickup stopped on the shoulder and the driver got out, walking onto the trail system parallel to my route. This was when the situation became genuinely frightening, as he was no longer pretending to be a casual observer. I could see him cutting through the bushes, trying to intercept me at the next turn where the path crossed an open meadow. I veered right instead, toward the service lane by the boat storage because there were cameras on the corner light pole, and I figured cameras meant accountability. Dry leaves crackled behind me, not a jogger's rhythm, more like a fast walk turning into a run. I glanced back and saw his cap bobbing above the brush, his hands empty, but his posture all wrong, shoulders forward like he was bracing to grab. I thumbed my phone awake and double-tapped the side button to pull up SOS. But I didn't hit call yet because moving was still my best defense. I started running much faster, but the man was also moving quickly and clearly knew the park layout well. It was obvious this wasn't his first time stalking someone here, given how confidently he navigated the terrain. Up ahead, I could see the playground where families usually brought their kids, but this evening it was completely empty. I didn't like the sight lines there, so I turned around hard and sprinted back toward the main path, hoping to find other people or reach a more populated area. Behind me, I could hear heavy footsteps as my pursuer gave up any pretense of subtlety. He wasn't calling out, not asking anything, just closing distance, which told me exactly what he wanted. Breaking through the tree line near the boat dock, I spotted an elderly couple feeding ducks by the water. I ran straight to them, gasping for breath as I explained what was happening. The man immediately pulled out his phone and called park police while his wife moved closer and said I should just sit with them on the low concrete curb by the dock and not try to be brave. And I didn't argue because my legs were buzzing and I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing. He said into the phone, "Possible stalker. Riverdale Park, boat dock by the big map sign." And he repeated the cross streets when they asked. Then he told me not to worry, because they were on the way. I turned to point down the trail where the guy had been coming through the brush a minute earlier, but the path looked normal again, just empty, and the bushes had settled like no one had ever been there, which made me feel stupid for a second, until I saw the broken twig on the edge of the gravel and remembered the scrape of his shoe. The wife kept saying, "Stay here, sweetheart. You don't need to explain anything right now." And she positioned herself between me and the trees in this solid, practical way that made sense. The park patrol showed up fast, like 8 or 9 minutes later. Lights rotating but no siren. 2 uniforms plus a third person in a polo who handled the radio, and they split up right away. One officer scanned the service lane toward the boat storage, another cut back along the meadow spur, and the third asked me to walk through what happened. I gave them the route, the truck's color, the dented bumper, the flickering taillight, the cap, my best guess on height, and I said he moved like he knew the shortcuts, which the officer wrote down in block letters on a pad. Officer Jenkins took my statement. He introduced himself with a quick nod and said, "I know this stretch. We've had complaints." And he promised they'd bump patrols near dusk and around the cameras by the boat storage corner. He didn't sugarcoat anything, which I appreciated. My description was basically a middle-aged guy in jeans and a baseball cap, and that could be half the men in Portland. And the plate I'd tried to memorize was only partial, and I might have been wrong on 2 digits because of the way the light hit it. They cruised the parallel road and ran the few plates they saw, but nothing popped, and the officers walked me to my car in the public lot by the tennis wall while the couple stayed with us, and the wife gave me a bottle of water from a cooler in their trunk, like this was just a normal park problem, which helped keep me from doing something dumb like trying to go back and spot him myself. Jenkins suggested I vary my routes and times, and said to text someone when I start and finish, which I already did half the time but not always, and he told me to call if I saw that truck again, and gave me a card with a direct line. 2 weeks later, same weekday, Same window before it got fully dark. Another woman posted in the neighborhood forum about a guy shadowing her by the footbridge, and when someone said call it in, she commented she already had, and she'd actually snapped a picture of the pickup's license plate as he rolled past the crosswalk a little too slow. That post lit up fast, and within an hour, I had a voicemail from a detective asking if I could confirm whether the truck in the photo matched what I'd seen. And yeah, the dent and the taillight looked right. Police traced the plate to a pickup reported stolen 3 days earlier from a neighboring district, which tracked with the sloppy taillight repair, and why none of the plates the patrol had run matched anything that night. But they never caught the driver. A week after that, they found the truck burned out in an industrial strip outside the city near a recycling yard. Total loss. And the detective said the fire destroyed any fingerprints or fibers they might have hoped for, and the dash cam, if it had one, was gone. I don't run alone anymore, and I drop a pin to a friend before I head out, and I pick loops with emergency call stations and cameras. And honestly, I switch to morning group runs, even though I'm not a morning person, because I'd rather be tired than cornered. I still catch myself scanning every dark pickup on the road, like it could be him testing boundaries again. And I wonder what exactly he was planning, and how many other women he'd shadowed in that park before trying me, and whether he's just moved a few miles over to repeat the same routine. So I read every local report about harassment on trails and make notes when details line up. Ball cap, slow roll, parallel roads, and sometimes I just sit with the math of it. How easily this could have gone the other way if that couple hadn't been feeding ducks at exactly the right moment. It happened last fall when my girlfriend Sarah and I were doing one of our spontaneous road trips through the backwoods of Washington County, Oregon. We loved exploring abandoned farms and forgotten settlements in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. This particular October night was cold and rainy, and we'd gotten completely lost on these dirt roads between Hillsborough and Forest Grove when our GPS stopped working. The rain had turned the road into a muddy mess, and fog reduced visibility to just a few yards. After driving around lost for about an hour, we spotted a narrow road leading up into the hills. I slowed because the road looked like someone had carved it out with a shovel and a bad attitude. Ruts full of standing water, blackberry canes leaning in, a bent no trespassing sign flat in the mud like a coaster. So I said, "It's probably just a driveway." And Sarah went, "Then we'll turn around at the top, 'cause I'm not sleeping out here." Which, fair. The radio had cut to static, my phone kept flashing no service, and the tank was dipping under a quarter. There were fresh tire tracks that didn't match ours, and they looked narrow, like from a compact truck, or something pulling something. And that bothered me more than I said. I eased onto the grade because backing down seemed worse in the rain. We climbed until the trees fell away and the mud shifted to slick moss over old pavement. The fog thinned for a second and showed a black rectangle up ahead, like an empty stage. "This is dumb," Sarah said, doing that leg bounce thing she does when she's nervous, and I said, 2 minutes. If it's nothing, we turn. Because turning around on that slope without line of sight felt like a coin flip. The wipers beat slow, and the engine wheezed as I tipped into second. Something clanked under the car, maybe a branch, maybe metal, and I felt it in the pedals. We crested into a clearing, and my high beams hit a yard that looked like a junkyard had exploded. There were car tires stacked in rotten columns, rusted barrels on their sides, broken furniture with stuffing spilling like cotton, and glittering shards of glass scattered across the pavement, like someone had spread it on purpose. The house at the back was half collapsed, boards nailed over windows at random angles. One corner of the roof caved in so you could see rafters like ribs. It didn't look lived in, except for the movement. Cats, dozens, poured around our lights, weaving through the piles, their eyes lighting green then vanishing low to the ground. They weren't meowing. They were silent, tails low, not curious at all. The smell through the vents wasn't animal. It was wet ash and something chemical, like burned plastic. "No," Sarah said, hand on my arm, nails light. "Turn. Right now." I started a careful reverse, checking the mirrors, trying not to cut a tire on all that glass. And that's when the first hit came. A chunk of brick, who knows from where, smashed the upper right of our windshield with this flat, heavy slap, and the glass bloomed into a spider web of tiny white lines. I flinched so hard I bumped the shifter into neutral. "Go!" Sarah yelled, voice cracking, and I threw it into reverse again, steering by the rear camera that was now mostly rain and mud streaks and a halo of fogged LEDs. Something moved to our left behind a mound of soaked couch cushions, and then a skinny guy stepped out, like he'd been waiting for the cue. He wore a dirty army jacket that hung off him, and he had a baseball bat resting on his shoulder. Not brand new, not taped, just wood gone soft at the handle. He didn't run. He just started walking, steady, eyes on my side window. At almost the same time, the house's front door banged open, and a tall woman with matted hair came out fast, one hand on the frame to steady herself. Her face and hands were smeared dark, soot or mud, I couldn't tell, and she was yelling hard, something rhythmic, like words. But the rain swallowed it, and the cat skittered in every direction, scattering into the junk like poured beads. The woman jabbed her finger toward us and shouted again, and for a second the guy turned his head like he was checking permission. Sarah whispered, "Don't stop," which I wasn't planning to do. The guy brought the bat down from his shoulder and tapped it twice on the wet pavement, like that was supposed to make a point, then picked up pace. I angled the car to keep him on my driver's side, buying space from the porch because the woman had started down the steps, bare feet slapping. Someone had nailed sheet metal to the porch rail. It rang when she hit it with her hip. Behind us, the path narrowed and tilted toward a ditch choked with branches. He lifted the bat and tested our cracked glass with a light rap, just a test, and I felt the thunk through the wheel like a warning. "Seat belts," I said, automatic, and Sarah already had hers cinched. I turned the wheel to the right, trying to clear a pile of wood that looked like a dismantled pallet, and the rear tires spun and then grabbed with a jolt. The woman's voice cut through for one word: "Stop." And then the rain swallowed her again. "I'm not," I said, and the guy stepped in front of the hood like he thought we'd blink. I and he had a look, half a second, not even. His eyes flat, jaw clenched, water running off the bill of a hat I hadn't noticed until then, and I did the only thing that made sense. I eased off the brake but kept the wheels turned, letting the car slide left around him. He swung low, bat glancing off the fender with a hollow clack that made Sarah gasp, and I didn't look at the damage because what would that change? The porch light flickered like someone had jostled whatever jury rig kept it on, and in that stutter, the yard changed from a scene to a trap, edges closing. I pinned the throttle just enough to keep traction without fishtailing and felt the car lift and settle as we rolled over something long, maybe a pipe, maybe a branch, and the rear end kicked. The woman kept screaming. The guy pivoted like he might take another swing, and I didn't give either of them the chance. I threw the car in reverse and got us out of there as fast as possible, bouncing over debris and branches. In the mirror, a beat-up Ford pickup lurched out from behind the house and fell in behind us like it had been staged. High beams welded to our cracked glass so the cabin turned into a light box, and I was steering by the pale edge of the road and the feel of ruts under the tires. "They're following," Sarah said, trying 911 again though we'd had no service for an hour. I kept it straight, bumped second, dropped onto the main track. The Ford closed until the bumper filled the mirror and stayed there, pressing, like they were testing how scared we were. I took the first fork left because the grade looked lower, then a sharp right where the ditch bit the shoulder and the back end tried to come around. The truck held position, horn once, then just engine and glare. I tried a light brake tap and instantly regretted it when they mirrored me and I almost spun. "Don't," Sarah said. "Just go." So I went, wipers hammering, tires slapping water, hands locked on the wheel, picking lines by memory and dumb luck and the way the mud looked less shiny. Now, before the next part, you should know those forest roads look cloned in rain, same trees crowding in, same bent markers, so we were guessing, not navigating. The call connected long enough for Sarah to yell we were between Hillsborough and Forest Grove near a collapsed house. The operator asked for cross streets. The call died. The truck never dropped back. If anything, it got braver, nosing into our blind spots on corners like it wanted me to twitch. I kept us center and let the engine work because panic makes dumb inputs, and we couldn't afford dumb. We clipped a narrow bridge, brushed a skinned guardrail, blew past a faded bus sign. The dash said 40 minutes of this, and it felt like more. Every time I thought we'd open space, they surged, like they knew the map by heart, and we were playing on their field. At a T with a county sign, I picked the name that felt shorter. The surface changed. Gravel to patchy asphalt to fresh paint, and the speed crept up because pavement felt safe, even though it wasn't. I hydroplaned once, corrected, forced my foot steady instead of stabbing the brake. The first big box sign through the mist felt like oxygen. Strip lights, wet parking lots, moving cars, normal life. We hit the outskirts of Hillsborough, and I flashed hazards and took the first gas station with people under the canopy. A minivan, an old sedan, 2 teens by the door. I swung to the pump closest to the store, laid on the horn, killed the engine. "Out," I said, and we got out because I didn't want to be trapped if they rammed us. The pickup braked late, then rolled past the entrance slow as a parade, real casual. Through the wet, I saw the same skinny guy in the dirty army jacket at the wheel, the same tall woman riding shotgun with one hand braced on the door, faces flat. No front plate I could see. They didn't stop. They slid the light and kept going toward the next intersection like we were nothing, like the chase hadn't happened at all. Inside, the attendant, a guy our age with a nose ring, already had the phone to his ear. "You okay?" he asked. I said, "We got chased out of the hills by people at a collapsed house," and pointed north. He told the dispatcher we were at his station, and a Ford had tailed us tight for a long run. The minivan dad said he'd seen the truck fly by with brights on. The attendant said that stretch is known for a camp that gets aggressive and throws rocks, that police know but don't linger 'cause it's spread out and nobody's been seriously hurt yet. A cruiser pulled in. The officer took our info, noted the house and the Ford, said they'd send a unit up, but unless we could ID the people or show a direct strike, it'd be trespass at best. He told us to file the online report at home and to get the glass replaced before it blew out. Sarah's hands shook signing. We bought duct tape to keep the corner calm and left by the main road without detours. Back at our apartment, we traced a map and couldn't agree on half the turns, and then we stopped. We're done with spontaneous back roads and falling down houses. We stick to places with service and witnesses. And sometimes, when it's late and tires hiss on wet pavement outside our window, I think about how different that night would have ended if we'd bogged down on their property, or if the engine had coughed once on that hill. About 3 years ago, I was living alone in a 2-story house in a quiet Denver suburb with my 3-year-old lab mix named Max. I worked from home doing freelance graphic design, and my hours were never the same 2 days in a row, which sounds nice until you realize it also means dinner at weird times and emails at midnight. That rainy April evening around 11 p.m., Max did his usual slow trot to the back door, did the little head tilt, then whined in that way that says, "I can't wait." I clipped his leash out of habit, even though the yard was fenced, shoved on sneakers, and slid the bolt on the door behind us because I always do that. No particular reason, just the kind of routine you don't think about until you need it. We stepped onto the slick concrete, and the yard looked like it always looked at night. The flower beds along the left fence line, the lilac bushes huddled near the corner, the small storage shed straight back with the busted lock plate I kept meaning to replace, I know. Max usually took 10 seconds, found his spot, and made a beeline back, but he walked stiff-legged toward the lilacs and stopped. Tail up, ears forward, that low sound in his throat that's not really a growl and not really a whine, more like he's thinking hard. I said, "Leave it, buddy." Tugged the leash to angle him toward the patio. He didn't budge. I told myself it was a raccoon or a possum, because we'd seen both in that strip before. Trash pandas love my neighbor's compost, and I wasn't trying to pick a fight through a fence. He pulled again, this time toward the shed, nails skidding on wet concrete, and the sound made me flinch because it carried in the rain. "Max, heel," I said, trying to sound casual because I didn't want to teach him that my nerves equal his nerves. He ignored me, nose high now, growl building. I squinted past the lilacs and took one step left to get the angle, and that's when I saw it. A hunched shape tight to the shed's back corner, exactly where the streetlight leaves that stupid triangle of shadow I always forget about. Dark jacket, knit cap, shoulders tucked in like he was trying to fuse with the siding, not moving, watching. My brain did that fast math, wrong hour, wrong posture, wrong place, and I felt that dumb urge to stare. Instead, I laughed at nothing, a little too loud probably, and said, "Come on, dude, we're not playing fetch in the rain," like I was talking to Max only. I turned for the house. Max planted his feet and barked straight at the shed, sharp and pissed now. I leaned my weight into the leash and dragged him a half step, then another, whispering, "Come on, come on," trying to be steady. Behind us, something shifted on the grass. Wet squelch, fast and close, like the person had decided stealth was a waste of time. I didn't turn around. Not running, not freezing either. Just moving in a straight line for the back steps because I knew I could get the door locked faster than anything else. Max kept barking over his shoulder and half walking backward. My fingers found the knob, the deadbolt slid, and we were inside. I threw the bottom lock and the top, set the chain, and flicked the kitchen light on. Tiny bit of theater, I guess, like a neon sign for someone home, not asleep. Max was losing it, front paws scraping the door, claws ticking. I told him to sit, which he did for half a second, then popped up and hammered the wood with both paws like he was trying to break out there instead of in here. I grabbed his collar and guided him to the side of the island, pressed my hand to his chest because that usually calms him, didn't really, and listened. Rain. Refrigerator hum. Then a careful rattle at the handle, slow, testing, followed by these small taps around the frame, like someone feeling for a weak spot, which, I hate that I know this, is how you find a latch that didn't catch. I lifted the corner of the curtain over the sink just enough to see the yard. The man was there, close and calm in a way that made me feel stupid for hoping it was just a kid cutting through. Same cap, same jacket, hands bare. He moved from the back door to the kitchen window and peered at his own reflection first like he was checking angles, then leaned in to look past the glass. Sidestep, scan, sidestep again. He didn't rush. He knew what he was doing. He went along the siding, pausing at the dining window, then the slider by the living room, checking latches, tapping trim, glancing back at the gate every so often like he had a rhythm. I pictured the old lock plate on the shed again and felt my jaw clench because careless stuff stacks up on you when you're tired and you think you'll fix it later. What if? I clipped Max's collar to the short leash I keep on the coat hook so he couldn't bolt back to the door, and we moved to the living room where the couch angles toward the hall. I kept the kitchen light on and the living room light off because there was no reason to gift him a clean view of me. The floor creaked under my left heel where the board's loose, another little thing I kept meaning to fix. And I froze, then shifted my weight to the rug. Max's breathing was loud against my knee, hot and fast. Rain hit the slider in little bursts. I heard the faint squeak of a window screen flexing, and then the thud of it snapping back. Now, before I explain what I did next, you should know I'm not the call 911 for noise neighbor. I shovel my own snow and deal with my own spiders, and I hate making a fuss. But a stranger encircling my first floor windows like he's picking a lock out of a menu is not a noise. It's a choice. I took the phone off the side table, ducked behind the arm of the couch so I was below the window line, and dialed. When the operator answered, I kept my voice low so the intruder wouldn't hear. "Ma'am, stay on the line and stay away from the windows," the dispatcher said, steady voice. And I said I was in the living room behind the couch with my dog restrained. And yes, the back door was locked. Yes, the deadbolt. Yes, the chain. I could still hear him outside. That same careful rhythm, metal on metal, then palms on glass. And every time he paused, Max would point his whole body at the sound and breathe like he wanted orders. The dispatcher asked for the cross streets, and if there were weapons in the home, no. If anyone else was inside, no. And if the basement had exterior access. I told her about the garden-level windows on the south side that sit under the deck, and how I always thought a person couldn't get through. Too narrow, too dumb to try. Then I heard nothing at all. That silence is hard to explain. Like the rain kept going, but the house got vacuum sealed, and it made the hair on my arms rise, which is when Max locked on the hallway and pulled, and I heard this soft, gritty scrape from the floor vents, like someone was working right under the deck where the concrete lip meets the window well. The dispatcher said, "Do not confront him. Officers are en route," and she had me confirm the address again. I crawled to the top of the basement stairs and listened. There it was, a tiny click, then another, like a bobby pin on aluminum, and I pictured the flimsy little latch I'd never upgraded because who would choose that window? Max bristled, let out one hard bark before I could clamp my hand over his muzzle, and the scraping stopped. We stayed completely still for maybe 20 seconds, me counting the numbers on the thermostat because it gave me something to do. Then the sound started again, slower this time, a patient testing, and I realized he wasn't guessing. He knew lock hardware. He had done this before. "Units are 3 blocks out," the dispatcher said, and as if on cue, I heard the faintest wail of sirens rolling through wet streets, growing, splitting at an intersection, that Doppler bend I will never not notice now. The scraping halted, quick shuffle above the well, a thump against the slats of the deck, then footsteps sliding in mud, and the hard rattle of my side gate yanked open and bouncing once against the latch. I told the dispatcher he was moving toward the alley, and she said the officers were pulling up from the north and to stay put. Max snapped at the end of the short leash, frustration vibrating through him, and I kept him close because the last thing I needed was a dog through glass if the guy doubled back. The sirens were right on us now, then cut, and red-blue flashed against the ceiling in a weird pulse that made the room feel smaller, and someone pounded the front door. "Police!" So I yelled back my name and that my dog was with me and I was coming slow. I kept the leash short, unlocked the deadbolt, cracked the door, and let them see my empty hands. Officer Harris took the front. Officer Chen moved past him with a hand up to keep Max behind my leg, and they were all business. Who, where, how long, which windows. I pointed them to the kitchen, then the slider, then the basement stairs, and Chen peeled off to the yard while Harris walked the inside perimeter checking latches like he lived there. When Chen radioed, I heard mud prints under the dining and the well, partial tread, no tool left. and my stomach sank anyway. The intruder was gone by the time they canvassed. Harris checked the alley with a flashlight beam that cut through the rain. Chen hopped 2 fences with the neighbor's permission. No one in the shadows, nothing in the hedges. They shined their lights along the siding and under the deck and showed me the scratch marks on the basement window lock. Fresh gouges bright against the dull metal, and the smear where a glove or a palm had skidded. We went next door and across the street. Nobody had seen anything except Mrs. Johnson, who said there'd been an unmarked white van idling midday. No ladders, no logos, 2 guys swapping places in the driver's seat like they were waiting out a clock. Harris wrote it all down. Plate unknown, model unknown. Maybe a Ford, maybe not. Chen measured the boot prints with a little folding ruler and said the tread looked like a common work boot. Men's, larger than mine at least, which didn't narrow much but meant I hadn't imagined anything. Back inside, they told me this happens in bursts, when someone decides a block is easy, that the person probably wasn't alone earlier, that the circling was deliberate to see if anyone answered, that sometimes they listen through vents to hear if a TV goes off or a faucet turns on, and I stood there with my wet dog and nodded while they walked me through next steps. Motion lights, window pins, real locks for the well covers, cameras, file a report, call if anything or anyone comes back. Even their order made sense in a way that turned my irritation at myself into a list. The report got my signature, the case number went on a card, and Harris said they'd loop in the day shift to look for the van. When they left, the door felt heavier. I put in the alarm and the extra locks that week, and I moved Max's bed closer to the back hall, and I fixed the shed plate, and I learned all the clicks my house makes after midnight. None of that stopped me from replaying the scraping on the lock and the quiet way he tried the glass. It wasn't the sirens or even the prints that stuck. It was knowing Max caught the change before I did, that he pulled me back inside when I thought I was just being jumpy. If he hadn't put his body between me and that shed exactly when he did, I would have been standing in the yard with my hands full of leash and keys, while a stranger decided what kind of door I was. I work as a security guard at a medical supply warehouse in the industrial district, and I usually walk home through Riverside Park after my 6 a.m. shift ends. The path cuts past a little pond, and then straight to the east gate, so I save like 10 minutes. And at that hour, there's usually just a couple joggers, and a guy who fishes in work boots. One rainy September morning, the storm drains had choked all night, and the low parts of the park were flooded. Water up to mid-calf and moving slow like a shallow river over the path. The lamps were off because maintenance hadn't started yet and the timer must have been messed up. So it was that gray pre-sunrise light where you can see shapes but not faces. I stood at the entrance for a second, thinking about detouring to the street, but I was soaked already from the warehouse to the corner, and it was still the shortest route home, so I figured I'd wait it. The park guys wouldn't be around for a couple hours, and I just wanted dry socks and a hot shower. I had my work jacket zipped and my flashlight clipped to my belt. Not that I love using it in the rain, 'cause water on the lens makes everything look worse. But I kept a hand on it anyway. The water felt colder than I expected, and there were leaves and bits of trash drifting by. A plastic grocery bag snagged around my shin like it had opinions, and I kept lifting my feet high so I wouldn't trip on the curb edges I couldn't see. Benches were half under, and the little trash can by the pond had floated sideways, lid banging softly. I don't spook easy. Night shift in empty buildings will beat that out of you. But something about the quiet after a storm is weird, like the air's still listening. I stayed near the inside rail of the path so if I slipped I'd have something to grab, and I kept glancing at the dark lump of the pond to my left, counting the little safety lights on the opposite shore that were dead this morning. I told myself it was fine. Keep moving. Get through. As I came even with the pond's closest curve, I heard splashing that didn't match my steps, kind of a sharp slapping, and I thought duck or maybe a dog, but then I saw a person in the water near the shore. Long hair plastered down, wet strands stuck to the side of their face, and it looked like a woman sitting in the shallows with her legs flat and her hands hitting the surface over and over. At first I thought, okay, some kind of therapy thing or a cold plunge situation. People do weird stuff at dawn. But the way her arms jerked was off, not steady, just hard random hits like she couldn't feel how loud it was. The noises she made weren't words, more like breaths pushed out wrong. I called out, "Hey, you good?" And she didn't react. Then she pitched forward face first into the water and didn't come up. That took it from weird to bad in a second, and I stepped off the path toward her without thinking. Angle to the right where the grass makes a little ramp. The water pushed at my knees when I left the paved edge, and I felt for the ground with my toes. Careful, because there's a lip there. I've sat on it in summer. "Ma'am," I shouted louder, already reaching for my phone even though it was in my inside pocket and probably damp. The screen lit, but the touch was jumpy under rain, and I was close enough now to see her hair floating out and her back humped under a soaked hoodie. I put the phone away and said, "I'm coming in. Don't move. Don't panic, okay? Because people thrash and drown you. I've had the training videos, and I was trying to spot how deep it got 2 steps out." She still didn't move. I took one more step, and then she lifted her head. She stared straight at me and didn't get up. Just her face above the water, hair sliding back, and the lack of blinking hit me before anything else. It wasn't that I could see her eyes clearly. I couldn't. The light was trash. It was the way her whole head locked on like a camera. "Hey," I said, softer, because sometimes you go quiet and people mirror you. Nothing. Then she pushed her palms into the mud and rose onto hands and knees without standing, which looked wrong immediately, like her legs weren't invited. She started moving toward me that way, slow and deliberate, keeping her back low, and the sound of her hands planting and pulling free was sticky in the flood. I said, "Stay where you are. I'll call it in." Because that's what you say when someone acts off and you're trying to keep control. But I was already turning my shoulders, lining up the quickest line back to the paved path. She picked up speed, still crawling, water slapping behind her, and something about the way she kept her head up, like she was trying to keep eye contact while her body did something else, made my skin go cold in a very practical way. This was about distance and footing now. "Stop," I said, and lifted a hand like a traffic cop, backing onto the path because the curb was slick, and I wasn't going to be the idiot who falls in front of a person who might be seizing or might be high or might be luring. You don't know. She didn't stop. She kept coming, fingers digging into the mud, breath coming out of her like she'd swallowed a bag and it was stuck in her throat. I turned around fully, clipped the flashlight so it wouldn't bounce loose, and started a jog toward the east gate. Steady, not a sprint, 'cause you don't want to slip in floodwater. Behind me I heard the splashing get messier and that raspy breathing closing the distance. I made it home and called the Park Services number listed on their website, put it on speaker, and set my phone on the kitchen counter so I could peel off my wet jacket. The dispatcher asked for my name, the cross streets, and what exactly I'd seen, so I told her I was a night shift guard. I cut through there every morning. There was a woman in the pond acting erratic. She went face first, then she crawled toward me. She had me repeat the timeline. How many minutes from first sight to me leaving, which path exit, then said, "Okay, stay available. We're sending a maintenance crew and notifying PD." I left the phone near the sink while I stood on a bath towel and changed socks. My hands were still shaking a bit, not panic, just too much adrenaline too fast without coffee. And I kept thinking about the way her head stayed up when everything else was low. About 40 minutes later, the dispatcher called back to say their crew was on site and officers were present. She patched me to one of the officers and he asked me to come outside if I felt up to it. He was already at my building because they like to take statements while details are fresh. We stood under the overhang by my door, him with a small notepad and a body-worn camera blinking. He asked me to walk him through it again, distance from the waterline, whether I used my flashlight, if there was anyone else around. I said I kept the light clipped because rain makes it useless. And no, I didn't hear anyone else. He talked into his shoulder mic and then said, "Our guys didn't find anybody in the water. They did see tracks at the mud edge. Looks like someone on their knees." He showed me a photo on his phone. Parallel depressions, handprints spaced far apart, a long smear where the hoodie might have dragged. He said, "We've had similar calls when the weather's bad. Likely a homeless woman with mental health issues crashing near the water features. They gravitate there for privacy and 'cause the bathrooms are nearby. Sometimes they do repetitive stuff. You did the right thing backing off." I asked if they were going to check hospitals or shelters, not accusing, just wanting to know the process, and he nodded, said they'd canvass the usual spots, add early morning patrols for a while, let park services post a closure if the flooding got worse. He asked if she said any words. I told him no words, just breathy sounds, and he wrote that down. He asked if I smelled alcohol or chemicals, and I said I couldn't smell anything over wet leaves and street runoff. He gave me a card and said, "If you think of anything else, even small, call me. And try not to go through there until the water drops." When he left, I made coffee I didn't really want and scrolled the neighborhood group to see if anyone else had posted. Nothing. Just a complaint about trash cans. I texted my coworker who does the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. with me sometimes. Told him I had a weird one and I was skipping the park for a bit. And he wrote back, "Yeah, dude. Heard sirens by Riverside like 20 ago." I kept the officer's card under a magnet on the fridge and went through my morning checklist out of habit. Charge flashlight, set out dry socks, write the incident time in my notes app in case anyone at the warehouse asked why I was late yesterday. I closed the bathroom window because it faces the street, and I didn't like thinking about water sounds. An hour later, the dispatcher sent a final message. No subject found. Patrols increased. Case number attached for my records. That was it. Nothing dramatic, just a call log and a photo of mud tracks I didn't want to look at again. I ended up changing my route home, took the bus 2 stops down, and cut behind the grocery store. And for a few weeks, I didn't even glance toward the park entrance when I passed it. Months later, I still feel my shoulders tighten if it's early and the curb puddles are high, 'cause that's enough to pull the whole thing back into my head like a replay you didn't ask for. The picture that sticks isn't even her face, it's the way she moved, the head locked on me and the rest of her low like she was keeping herself under a line. Sometimes I go back and forth on it. Like, what if she was mid-crisis and needed someone to grab her? What if I should have called out louder or used the light straight in her eyes? But my gut said, get out. And years of night shifts taught me that's a good rule when your brain starts doing math about distance and footing. I never heard about a body found or an arrest or anything, so it's just a gap in the story that no one's gonna fill for me. And that's fine, I guess. Because the only part I had any control over was leaving when I did, and I'm glad I trusted that and kept moving. Way back in 2017 when I was 16, me and 4 friends used to explore abandoned buildings in the old part of Detroit, where the economic collapse had left tons of empty structures. We picked the Meridian Health Center, a private clinic that had been shut down in 2019 after losing its license and going bankrupt. The 3-story building had an outpatient clinic on the first floor and an inpatient ward upstairs. On this foggy October night, the 5 of us got in through an unlocked service entrance, using our phone flashlights to see. The place still smelled like disinfectant mixed with mold and decay. The hallway by the service door had a wall clock frozen at 2:14, a busted vending machine, and a yellow mop bucket tipped on its side with dried streaks everywhere, like someone quit mid-shift and never came back. We kept saying dumb stuff to sound braver. You know, that jittery fake confidence. And I remember noticing the exam room sign still taped up. Derm, imaging, billing, like someone was going to walk out and ask for a copay. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand we weren't thieves or vandals. We were just kids with phones and no money who liked dares. So when we saw the reception window still had a little bell on the counter, I rang it, which echoed way too much in the dark. Danny laughed, someone shooshed him, and that's when I got that first bad feeling I couldn't explain. Like the building wasn't empty in the way we wanted it to be. The first floor had leftover medical equipment scattered around, broken examination tables, scattered patient files, empty medication boxes. We were being pretty loud, laughing and joking around as we explored deeper into the building. Then we heard this loud crash from the second floor, like someone had knocked over a metal gurney or something heavy. My friend Danny, who was always the boldest in our group, suggested we check out what made the noise. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but peer pressure won out. "We go together, quick in and out," I said, trying to sound in charge even though my palms were sweaty and my phone kept slipping. The staircase creaked under our weight, and the air got stuffier as we climbed, with this sour smell getting stronger. On the landing, there was a taped paper that said, "No patient access, staff only," and someone had drawn a smiley face over it. And I don't know why, but that dumb smiley made me uneasy, 'cause it looked fresh, like someone had done it after lights out. We hit the second floor hall, and our lights picked up a trail of something smeared, brownish, maybe rust, maybe worse, leading toward the inpatient rooms. Danny whispered, "Probably raccoons," and somebody behind me said, "Not in here, man." And then the smell got real, like rotten meat mixed with bleach, and we were already committed, so we kept moving. Slow, trying to keep the beam steady while our shoes stuck a bit on torn linoleum. In one of the patient rooms, we found a dead dog with its stomach cut open, and the stench was absolutely revolting. One of my friends immediately threw up from the smell and sight. That's when we heard whispering coming from the corner of the room. Our flashlights revealed this guy in his 50s wearing a filthy hospital gown and torn pants. His legs were covered in open sores, and he was holding what looked like a rusty scalpel. For a second, nobody talked, just our breathing and the drip-drip from somewhere behind him, and the way he crouched there on a mattress spring like he was trying to make himself smaller but not really hiding made everything feel wrong. Danny blurted, "Hey, we don't want trouble." And the man tilted his head, eyes too bright in the light, grinning like he'd rehearsed the expression in a mirror. "You bring me anything?" he asked in this hoarse whisper, like the words hurt. "Any food?" He lifted the scalpel a little, not swinging it, just showing he had it. And I saw the blade was dark along the edge, rust, blood, both. And my chest went tight. I said, "We'll leave." Because that made sense, right? We leave. He keeps whatever he's got going on here. No one does anything stupid. He stared at the dog, then at us, and he kind of licked his lips like a nervous tick, and he said, "They locked me out down there, no trays, so I've been taking what comes." Someone behind me whimpered. I think it was Kyle. And that tiny sound set him off smiling wider. He took a slow step, the scalpel twitching, and asked again if we'd brought food, real soft, like he didn't want to scare it away. We all freaked out and ran for the exit. We bolted out of that building faster than I'd ever moved in my life. It took 3 of us pulling with all our strength to get the heavy service door closed behind us, and just before we managed to shut it, I could still see the silhouette of that guy watching us from the hallway. Danny yelled to push lower. "Lever it! Lever it!" And the latch finally bit. This sharp metal clack that felt way too loud. and then it was just the fog and our breath and the busted loading ramp under our shoes. We sat on the cracked concrete, phones still in our hands but nobody recording anymore. Just that aftertaste of the smell stuck in the back of our throats. Somebody said, "No way that was real." And somebody else said, "It was a costume," which made no sense even while they said it. I remember hearing my heartbeat over traffic from the main road and looking at the service door like it might open again. The image of him crouched on that spring, the scalpel in that chewed-up hand, was burned in so hard I kept blinking and still seeing it. We kept asking each other what we saw, like taking turns retelling it would make it less bad. "The dog was already dead," Kyle said, like that mattered to anything, and Danny snapped back, "He killed it," and then apologized, because none of us knew for sure. "We should go," I said, and nobody argued, which never happened with us. Someone always wanted one more look normally. We moved fast to the streetlight at the corner because it felt safer there. Dumb, I know, but that circle of light made it easier to breathe. And then we split without the usual jokes, just a quick, "Text me when you get home." I checked behind us every half block, waiting for the door to open or a shape to follow. Nothing did, but I didn't stop checking until my house door was locked. I showered and it didn't help. The smell was in my head, and every scrape of the shower rod made me flinch like metal was moving upstairs. For a while after that, we didn't talk about it much, like we'd agreed without saying it to let it fade. But it didn't really fade. Little stuff would set it off. Passing a clinic sign, the sound of a cart rolling somewhere, even the chemical sting from a gas station bathroom. And then one of us would text the group chat a single word, "Meridian," and the replies would come in fast like, "Drop it," or just the sick emoji. We didn't go back to the old part of Detroit. If we drove near it, we kept the windows up. If another friend asked for a spot to explore, we said no and let them think we were being lame because that was easier than explaining the thing we'd seen and the guy asking for food like it was nothing. About a year later, police arrested the guy, Richard Hayes, a former maintenance worker at the clinic who'd been living there since it closed. It was in a short local article first, and then a longer piece that named the building and had a photo of the boarded windows. When I saw his name, I read every line twice. He was addicted to drugs and had serious mental health problems, surviving by eating scraps from dumpsters and catching stray animals. When they arrested him, he had several knives and medical tools stashed around the building. There was a quote about improvised bedding in multiple rooms, which made sense with the mattress spring, and a line about evidence of animal harm, which made my stomach flip even though we all knew already. Investigators said he could have easily attacked us if we'd stayed longer or if he'd been more aggressive that night. One detective was blunt in the report. Kids had been seen going in for years, and it was a miracle no one got cornered in a stairwell. After that, none of us ever went into another abandoned building. Not even the easy ones people film for clout. We cleaned our feeds and stopped talking like we were urban explorers, because we weren't. We'd just been lucky idiots. Sometimes I think about how close we came to a really bad situation, and it's not some dramatic thing where I swear off everything forever. It's simpler, like I replay that moment where he lifted the scalpel just a little and asked if we had food, and I realized that if any one of us had tried to act tough, or crack a joke, or step forward for a better shot, it might have gone the other way, and that's it. There's no moral. Just a thin line between a creepy story and a headline with our names. And I don't cross lines like that anymore. Before I joined the Park Service, I used to work as a wildlife research assistant while studying forestry at University of Montana. The summer of 2020, I was doing a deer population study in this remote section of Gallatin National Forest. My research area was several miles from the nearest hiking trail, accessible only by an old logging road. In 3 weeks of fieldwork, I'd never encountered another person in that wilderness. The study involved setting up trail cameras along this creek that was the main water source for wildlife in the area. It was completely isolated, which made it perfect for observing natural animal behavior. On the first run, I parked at an overgrown turnout, locked the truck, and hauled in a pack with cameras, straps, and a little tool roll. The creek ran tight between willows and deadfall, and I kept it simple. Camera every few hundred yards facing game trails, SD cards labeled, GPS cords in a notebook. I checked my back trail out of habit. Tracks tell you if you've got company. But it was just my boot prints and a lazy whitetail cutting across. I liked the quiet. Data first, that was the job. No hero stuff, no wandering off the line. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand the routine. I'd go in late morning, move steady, and be back at the truck by late afternoon. No camping on site. I carried bear spray and a basic first aid kit, and I kept my phone on airplane mode to save battery. Text my in, out when I had bars. Predictable was the whole point. I wasn't out there to be a hero, just to collect clean data and not spook deer. During my first trip to install the cameras, I heard this weird metallic clanging coming from the north, like someone rhythmically banging on a metal pipe or bucket. The sound went on for about 10 minutes, then stopped. It came in bursts, 3 hits, pause, 3 again, like a signal, which sounds dramatic, but that's what it was like. I stood on the creek bank listening with my hand on a useless radio and told myself it was wind on scrap tin from an old camp or a gate somewhere. There are always gates. Either way, it wasn't my mission, so I kept moving. A little past noon, I found the beaver. It was on a gravel bar, belly up, decapitated with what looked like a hunting knife. The cut was clean and the pelt was untouched. Ants were already swarming the belly. There were lug-soled boot prints in the wet sand and a faint drag line into the willows that ended in trampled grass. No head. I took 2 quick photos for the log, then stepped back because it didn't look like a trapper's mess or a cougar kill. It looked deliberate and sloppy at the same time, and if someone was pulling illegal sets up here, I didn't want to be standing over their work. I finished the line fast after that. Cameras a touch higher, straps tight, no reflective tape showing, and angled north on the way out to see if I could locate the source of that clanging. All I found was a rusted 55-gallon drum, half buried in mud near the old road. I tapped it. Dull thud. No rhythm. The only other new thing was a cigarette filter mashed into the sand by the creek. Could have floated in. Could have not. I bagged it anyway and hiked out with that prickly feeling between your shoulder blades that you talk yourself out of because you're alone and don't want to be jumpy. A week later, I returned in the late afternoon to check the cameras, planning to finish before dark. My advisor wanted the cards swapped and asked me to add 2 angles at the beaver spot to catch human activity if there was any. Same turnout, same mileage note on the clipboard, same walk-in, just a little faster because clouds were stacking and I didn't want to get soaked. First 2 cameras looked normal. Thumbnails showed deer noses, raccoon tail, a black bear's rear end. Nothing weird. At the 3rd camera, the strap was slightly lower than I set it. Not by much, but I'm a creature of habit. I mount at sternum height, buckle tail tucked the same way every time. This one sat at belt line, and the buckle had been retensioned in a way I don't do. No claw marks, no scrape on the bark. I told myself a sagging branch brushed it, and I was overthinking. I do that. Then moved faster, keeping my eyes open for fresh boot tread. By the time I got back to the gravel bar, the beaver carcass was gone. No bones, no hair clumps, just a dark stain on the rocks and smeared footprints like someone had shuffled around wiping sign. The prints overlapped mine from the week before. I took photos, set the extra cameras facing 2 approaches, and decided I was done being slow about it. Time to get back to the truck before the light dropped. On my way back along the same trail with my flashlight, I walked straight into this army cot that had been strung up across the path with ropes. It was loaded with empty cans and plastic bottles that created a makeshift tripwire setup. Everything rattled and clattered and bounced off my chest, and the noise punched through the trees hard. I stepped back, catching the white nylon tied to a sapling at shoulder height, and a second line run low like a snare. The cot had been hoisted between 2 trunks, chest high, not ankle, and there were fresh knots I didn't recognize. My first dumb thought was bear deterrent, but bears don't tie knots and they don't collect bottles. I crouched and traced the ropes to a little blind cut into the brush. Kneeling spot, crushed cigarette filter, heel print still crisp. The obstacle wasn't there to keep anything out. It was there to make noise and slow me down at a choke point about 20 minutes from the truck, 5 past my last camera. The positioning was too precise to be accidental, and it was clearly meant to block or trip anyone using the trail. Someone had been watching my movements and knew my routine. I thumbed the radio on and kept my voice low, even though it didn't really matter. "Base, this is Mason. I'm heading out. I need a pickup at the old logging road gate. Can you have Tom meet me there?" And my supervisor came back after a beat like he was moving to better reception. "Copy. I'm on my way, 20. I didn't argue the number. I just started a steady pace around the cot, cut the low line with my multi-tool so it wouldn't snag my legs on the return, and marked the spot in my notebook with a quick triangle and time. Practical stuff. Nothing fancy. I stayed off the trail for 50 yards just in case someone had more lines strung ahead, then eased back on where I could see my own boot prints and the typical elk sign. I kept the flashlight ready but didn't use it unless I had to because the light draws eyes, and I didn't want that. Halfway to the road, the metallic banging started again, only closer and more insistent, like whoever had the pipe was walking parallel to me and hitting it against a drum or a tank in hard threes, and I could hear the rhythm bouncing off the trees. I stopped long enough to check bearings, north, still north, and then I saw a low orange glow through the lodge poles. Not a sunrise kind of glow. A campfire that someone had banked behind a tarp or rock. Silhouettes passed through it, 2 for sure, maybe 3, and one of them lifted something long and set it down, not like a rifle being shouldered, more like moving a pole. But I wasn't going to squint and pretend that helped. I said out loud, "Nope," because that was enough for me. No closer, no curiosity. I wasn't a cop. The banging picked up when I changed pace, like they wanted me to know they knew. I heard a voice once, couldn't make the words, just the tone, sharp, annoyed, and the fire glow dipped and came back up like someone tossed on more wood. I kept my route between deadfall and stayed in the darker gaps. When I crossed the little drainage where the mud holds prints, I took 3 quick photos with my phone facing upslope and down. No flash. Documentation, not heroics. I broke out at the road a few minutes ahead of Tom. He rolled up in his state green Tacoma with the magnet beacon in the glove box, not lit, because we weren't doing a parade. He leaned out. "You good?" And I said, "I tripped a noise rig on the way out," and he told me to get in, which I did, and we didn't talk much until we put a mile between us and the gate. Then I told him the beats. Caught across the trail, bottles, lines, lower buckle moved on camera 3, carcass gone, silhouettes at a fire, the pipe noise trying to herd me out, the cigarette filters, all of it. He just nodded and said, "We'll flag it," which is how he talks about calling the Rangers, and that was the plan. No detours, no dramatic U-turns to go take a look, just out. Tom called it in once we hit a spot with bars, then told me to write it up clean and send GPS pins. I did it that night with times and photos. I slept at home because there was nothing brave to do by staying in the woods after we'd already left. Later that week, Forest rangers hiked in on the pins and found an illegal camp in that drainage. Same glow spot from my mark. Same barrel I had tapped the week before. Only now it was flipped and used as a table with a piece of plywood on top. They told Tom they recovered buckets with bile-stained lids, a cutting board with horizontal scoring, and 4 steel snares tucked off the game trail at shin height. There were bear pads dragged in, gallbladder jars, and a cooler with paw sections on ice. No people when they got there. Site was warm, coffee still in a chipped mug gone cold, fresh ashes. But whoever ran it had cut out fast. The rangers said the pipe noise trick wasn't weird at all, just old school intimidation. And the cot was exactly what we thought. Slow you, make noise, make you predictable. They called it a cruelty crime scene and they packed everything out bagged and tagged. One of the rangers, a guy named Ellis who'd worked poaching cases before, told me straight. You didn't want to walk in on that. They get cagey when they've got inventory. He said bears are cash to the wrong people, and anyone protecting that kind of setup isn't thinking about my school credit. He asked if I wanted to ride along when they canvassed the closest pullouts to look for tire patterns, and I said no because I had class, and also because I'm not a cop. I handed over my photos, my notes, my cigarette filters in little zip bags, and that was my piece. I still do field work, and I still go alone sometimes, but I don't do predictable anymore. Routes rotate, check-ins are strict, pins go to 2 people, and if something feels off, I call it off because there's nothing brave about stepping into someone else's crime to prove you can keep a schedule. In 2020, I worked at the Comfort Inn Hotel near the highway, which mainly served passing travelers and truck drivers. My name's Brandon, and I was on the graveyard shift, 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., the kind of hours where the coffee tastes like batteries, and you memorize the sound of the front doors so well that any change makes you twitch. We weren't fancy. 3 stars on paper, vending machines that ate singles, lobby TV stuck on the weather, but it was clean and predictable. I had a coworker at night, Jason, who liked rules more than small talk, and most folks who came in after midnight just wanted a hot shower and 4 hours with the blackout curtains. The worst we usually saw were couples arguing about a phone charger or a guy sleeping in the armchair because his wife locked the deadbolt, and yeah, sometimes we'd get someone buzzed and loud, but it never felt like danger, not really. That September, though, first cool week after a brutal summer, I learned the line between routine and we're not trained for this is thinner than it looks on a schedule. Around 3 a.m., a guy in his 50s came in like he'd been pulled through an engine block, greasy jeans, work boots chewed up at the toes, hands shaking like he'd downed a gallon of gas station coffee. He didn't say hi, just need a room now, and slapped the bell even though I was already there. I did the usual ID form. We've got a non-smoking queen. Do you want the second floor or first? And he muttered something about his truck dying on the ramp, how he just needed a place to crash a few hours because he had deliveries in the morning. Fine, common story. Then we hit payment and he goes, real flat. I'll pay in the morning. Like that settled it. Our policy was carved in stone. Pay up front, no exceptions. 'Cause if you don't, people disappear before sunrise and those rooms don't clean themselves. I kept my voice calm, told him we could hold with a card, or he could try the ATM across the lot, or we could call roadside and get him a tow discount so he could sleep in the cab in their yard for free for a few hours. Options, you know, something workable. He started getting hot, saying we were heartless, and it was $30 of electricity and sheets, which, not how hotels work, and he leaned over the counter hard enough that the pen cup skittered. Jason heard the tone and came out from the back. He does this thing where he plants his feet like a referee and said, "Sir, you gotta pay or you gotta go. Those are the choices." The guy's eyes went glassy and mean. That stubborn glaze like a person's already decided how the scene ends and you're just catching up. He scanned the lobby, a sad plant, a luggage cart, the corridor to the elevators, and then did something I still can't quite make sense of. Instead of arguing more or walking out, he lunged sideways, shoved the brochure rack so it scraped loud across the tile, and sprinted past the ice machine sign into the guest hall. Jason swore and went after him. I hit the house phone to page maintenance, habit, like they're gonna parachute in, and then followed, keeping enough distance to see corners. The guy hit the elevator call button, popped a look back at us, changed his mind, pushed through the stairwell door, and pounded down. I heard the echo bounce weird, basement level, not ground. And my stomach did that drop because the basement at our place is a maze, not in a cute way either. It's linen shelves and rolling bins and the old soda machine we never fixed. Narrow lanes you have to turn sideways in. Emergency lights that hum and flicker like they're daring you to trip. He'd picked the worst possible terrain for anyone who doesn't know it, and he still beat us to the bottom. We hit the landing and paused long enough to hear where he'd gone. Somewhere left, something knocked over. Jason looked at me like, "We finished this," and said we should flush him out fast. 2 directions, corner him at the laundry press. And yeah, I get it. We had sleeping guests. The last thing we needed was a stranger hiding in shelves with who knows what in his pockets. And if he set off a sprinkler down there, we'd drown a week's profit in one night. But I could feel my hands shaking against the stair rail, and not from fear exactly. More from math. Tight spaces, bad light. A guy who'd just run at full speed into a place only we knew. And the fact that we don't carry anything but radios and a first aid kit. I said, "Stop. We're calling it in." And reached for my cell because the desk phone wouldn't reach the basement, and I wasn't going to leave Jason alone to run upstairs. He rolled his eyes. He hates involving cops unless we've got a plate number. But I told him, look at the variables. Look at his behavior. He might be spun. He might be lost. He might just be desperate. But either way, we're not going to play tag among metal shelves with a stranger at 3 in the morning. From deeper in the maze, something thudded. A skid, then silence that felt staged, and that sealed it for me. I kept my voice low. I'm not being a hero for minimum wage, and I dialed 911. It was better to leave the detention to professionals who had training and equipment. The cruisers rolled up in about 15 minutes, 2 under the front awning and 1 by the side door near the laundry ramp, and the sergeant split them fast, 2 to the stairwell, 2 with us at the bottom, while I stayed on with dispatch because it kept my hands busy. They kept their lights off. Those small chest flashlights did short sweeps so they didn't backlight themselves, and the sergeant wanted a quick map. I pointed out the press, the boiler cage, the linen aisles that narrowed near the old conference furniture, and the loading exit that stuck in damp weather. Jason stood right of me, quiet for once, and I kept talking the layout so nobody ended up cornered by a shelf. They moved shelf to shelf, calling, "Police, announce yourself." Then softer as the aisles tightened, and when they reached the far corner, a beam hit a hunched shape, wedged behind 2 armoires and a stack of folded banquet tables from our conference days. "Hands where we can see them," one officer said. The guy twisted and the steel flashed, a kitchen knife 8 inches long, bulk pack cheap. Someone had left a mixed box of supplies by the housekeeping sink. Sponges, a box cutter, loose forks from Lost and Found, and he must have fished the knife from there. He held it low like he wasn't sure what to do with it, which somehow made it worse. No one rushed him. The sergeant kept a palm up and used that practiced voice that only sounds boring when you don't need it. Told him to breathe. Told him nobody wanted him hurt. Told him medical was waiting if he put it down. The other 2 shifted a little. Not enough to spook him, just to keep angles clean. And I could see their tasers still holstered. Message clear. Finish this clean. He touched the blade to his wrist and flinched at the first sting. "Stop. Look at me," the sergeant said. And then he said the man's first name like he'd already gotten it from dispatch, and that snagged him. The knife rattled on the concrete before anyone touched him. They moved in smooth, 1 foot on the blade, 1 hand on his wrist, cuffs without drama. He sagged onto a rolling linen bin, and they checked his arms, just a scratch. On the way up, he bucked once. The sergeant shifted his grip and said, "You're done," and that was it. EMS staged by the side door and checked vitals and pupils. He was sweating through his shirt and muttering about being late and losing work. Classic stimulant talk, and they cleared him for transport. Then came the quick grind. Body cam tags, our initial statements, a count of what was in that supply box, and a call to the GM because armed subject gets him in the car. At sunrise, a detective showed for follow-ups. Why he ran, whether he mentioned guests, whether we'd seen him outside earlier. They pulled lobby and hallway footage to confirm his path and bagged the knife. He got booked on trespass, possession of a weapon, and resisting, then held for evaluation. The talk screen came back hot for methamphetamine, and records showed priors for assault and robbery. A judge ordered 2 weeks in a psychiatric clinic for treatment and observation. After that, he landed on probation with conditions and check-ins. Jason and I gave longer statements, and the prosecutor's aide said our timeline helped show intent and pattern, not a one-off mess. Our GM looped us into the file because our testimony supported that pattern, and we answered the boring but necessary stuff. Who left the supply box? When was the last basement check? Did we warn him about trespassing? It was systematic. He didn't invent that plan at our counter. Somewhere it had probably gone worse. We locked down loose gear, killed the habit of staging mixed boxes in common areas, and posted a basement checklist where people actually looked. After that, I set simple tripwires and stuck to them. First sign of aggression with no payment, call it in. Refusal to leave, lock the desk and step back. Sudden move towards staff space, hit the alarm. The hotel put more cameras in the basement and gave us panic buttons tied straight to dispatch. I trained new hires with short rules and quick examples because that's what you remember at 3 a.m. Jason told me over a half-cold coffee, "You were right, man." And he meant it. Being 2 unarmed guys in a dark maze with a desperate stranger could have gone bad in one cut. 6 months later, I moved to day shift, front desk lead, more emails, fewer drunks. And on my last overnight, I walked the basement once, not a victory lap, just habit. Checked the lights, the exits, the new camera above the press. I still think about what didn't happen, because that's how I work now. We had a man high and scared with a knife, a cluttered maze, and 2 employees who could have chased because it felt like our job. And if we'd gone on instinct, it could have ended bloody or worse, a guest drifting in at the wrong minute. So I keep the rule that saved us. Call early, keep distance, let the trained people do the holding. It happened last spring when I was grocery shopping with my 2-year-old son Tyler at our usual supermarket. We went in like we always do. Tyler strapped into the cart seat with his little snack cup. Me grabbing a handbasket because we only needed a few things. Milk, bananas, pasta sauce, that kind of boring list. And this older woman, maybe 70s, drifted over by the tomatoes and goes, "Crazy sale on canned veg today, huh?" She smiled a lot, friendly enough, and I nodded and smiled back, because that's what you do when you're trying to keep a toddler from hurling a grape. She slid right into questions. Tyler's exact age, if he was my only, where in town we lived, and it was fast, like bullet points. I kept it vague. He just turned 2, and we're nearby. All those safe little non-answers that still sound polite. Then she says she has children's clothes in her trunk, brand new boy stuff, all in Tyler's size range, and she wants to give it to us for free. I told her thanks, but no thanks. We're good. We're actually in a rush. And she kind of laughed and waved it off like I'd misunderstood and said it was no trouble at all. Her car was right out front. When I said again that we couldn't, she got persistent in this weird, soft way, smiling, nodding, but pushing. Come on, honey. It's silly to waste it. I bought too much for my grandson. And then adding these little hooks like, they grow so fast, it's hard to keep up, right? I kept my hand on the cart and angled away, and she shuffled along with us, too close, still talking about sizes and seasons, and how boys are rough on knees, which, yeah, true, but also like, why are you selling me on this so hard? She asked if I was a single mom, and if money was tight, just like that, and then said she'd wait for us in the parking lot, right by the cart corral, so she could catch us when we finished, and something in my stomach just turned. I told her we had everything we needed. She kept switching tactics. No strings. I hate waste. It would make me feel better. And I said, we're not heading out yet, which was true, and started down the baking aisle, the one with the narrow shelves and nowhere to stand around. People started giving looks because she wouldn't let it go. You don't have to be proud, she added, which rubbed me wrong. And I said, firm. We're not interested. And she made this small, frustrated breath like a teapot noise, and then pasted the smile back on. Tyler asked for crackers, and I used that to move, saying I had to grab them quick, anything to end it, so I could put distance between us. She finally stopped following, at least physically, and I heard her say behind me, I'll wait outside, take your time, like she was confirming an appointment we didn't make. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand, I'm not the jumpy type. I worked retail for years. I've had 100-odd interactions that were nothing. But the questions about where we lived, and if I had help with bills, those weren't chatty grandma questions. Those were intake questions. So I finished fast, skipped the samples, cut down 3 aisles I didn't need, and doubled back for milk last, because it buys you a few more minutes if you end up needing to stand in a line. I declined her offer again near the dairy case because she turned up there too, like she'd predicted our route. And I didn't even bother with polite that time. No, thank you. Please stop asking. She tilted her head like she didn't hear me and said she'd be right out front. The tone was off, too determined, like she was trying to keep a schedule. I pulled Tyler's straps tighter. He wiggles, and I wasn't in the mood for a jump out, and headed to grab pasta sauce and the cheapest coffee on the end cap so I could get to checkout and out. After about 15 minutes, I'm thinking she finally gave up, and then I saw her again. But now she wasn't alone. She was in the middle of the store with a younger guy, 30s maybe, clean ball cap, cheap hoodie, no cart, no basket, no store brand anything in their hands. They weren't picking up items or comparing labels or doing anything normal. They were just watching. Not us specifically at that second, but scanning for families with little kids. My words, not theirs, but that's exactly what it looked like. I pretended to read a jar label and looked up again. Same spot. He said something to her and she nodded, and both of them did this slow look down the main aisle, past the toy display, toward the automatic doors. It hit me all at once that this wasn't just a lonely lady with extra clothes. I turned the cart so Tyler was between me and a shelf, used the handle as a barrier, and kept them in my peripheral vision while I inched toward a different aisle, trying to break the line of sight without making a scene. They stayed planted. Still no cart. Still no shopping. The younger guy checked his phone, and then looked up in this deliberate way that made my skin crawl, like he was timing something around who was heading where, and who had kids that were squirmy or loud or easy to distract. The older woman's smile was gone now. Neutral face. Focused. I thought about her asking if I was alone, about the cart corral, about the trunk, and I felt stupid for even answering her in the first place. The fact that she'd zeroed in on me and Tyler so specifically, combined with her detailed questions about our family situation, started to feel like a coordinated effort to identify potential targets. I cut down a side aisle and hit self-checkout because it let me keep the cart facing outward so I could watch the main lanes, and I scanned fast. Milk, pasta sauce, coffee, crackers, bananas, bagged everything myself, kept Tyler strapped in. Instead of heading for the big sliding doors near the toy display, I took the corridor by customer service that dumps you near the garden exit. Smaller door, fewer people. And I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, but I kept moving, not running, just steady. Outside, the air was bright and flat, and I paused just long enough to glance left toward the cart corral she had mentioned. I didn't see her there. I didn't see the guy either. I went right. I kept my keys laced between my fingers, even though that's more internet tip than real plan, and I pushed the cart straight to my car without stopping, unlocked with the fob, yanked the rear door open, and clicked Tyler into his seat. He tried to hand me a cracker and I said, "Hang on, buddy." And I scanned the rows. Pickup truck, silver sedan, minivan with a dented bumper, looking for that floral blouse, that ball cap. Nothing obvious, but it's a parking lot. There's always movement, and a white SUV idled 2 rows over with someone in the driver's seat on their phone. I shut Tyler's door, hit lock until I heard the thunk, and swung the trunk up. I lifted the bags in, top to bottom, heavy stuff first, because I wanted to be able to slam the trunk if I had to without crushing eggs. My eyes were doing laps. The garden exit behind me whooshed open and a couple with a flatbed cart rolled out and kept going. I didn't see the older woman. I didn't see the man. I did see a gray compact roll slowly along the aisle perpendicular to mine. Pause. Then keep going, which is normal. But the pause made me tuck myself between the open trunk and the car body, so I wasn't just standing out in the open like a target. I finished loading, dropped the cart handle to the ground so it wouldn't wander, slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors again, habit, but also not, and started the engine. I pulled out of the space without backing straight down the main lane, angled through the emptier end of the row so I wouldn't pass the front doors. I took the far exit, not the one by the cart corral. While I drove, I checked the mirror to see if anyone pulled out when I did. A dark sedan slipped in behind me but turned toward the gas station, and I exhaled without meaning to. As I reached the light, I thought about those posts you see. How people use friendly chat to get you to follow them somewhere, just for a second. How they look for single parents juggling bags. How they wait near the cart corrals because you're distracted buckling your kid in. I couldn't prove that's what this was. I know that. But it had too many pieces that lined up wrong. The intake-style questions, the insistence on going to her car, the parking lot appointment she set without me, the guy with no cart watching families from the main aisle. The light turned green, and I took a route home that skipped our usual turn, just in case, and I checked my mirror at every third intersection until the store was long gone. I've thought about that encounter many times since then, trying to figure out if I overreacted or if I reacted exactly right. And honestly, the only thing I keep coming back to is how different it felt from normal small talk. Strangers say, "He's cute," and "How old?" And then they move on. They don't keep pushing after 3 no's. They don't try to set a meetup at their trunk. They don't probe if you're alone or if money's tight while their partner watches the exit. And maybe it was some awkward grandmother with a lot of boy clothes and a bad sense of boundaries. But the pattern was there. The targeting of moms who look busy or tired or just one-handed with a toddler who drops snacks. And that's enough for me. So I didn't report it because what would I even say that's actionable? A lady asked questions and wouldn't take no for an answer. But I changed how I do things. I keep Tyler strapped until the cart is empty and the doors are locked. I pick exits with lines of sight. I don't let politeness carry me towards somebody else's car. And if a stranger tries to make their problem my emergency again, I'll say no once, loud, and then I'm gone. I work at a downtown bar called Cobra, and after a crazy week of drunk customers and late nights, I decided to spend my day off relaxing at home. I'm 35, my name's Rachel, and the plan was dumb simple. Sleep in, make coffee, maybe fold laundry if I felt ambitious. Around noon, I ran to the corner store for milk and bread, locked my apartment behind me, deadbolt and knob, and was back just under an hour later. My kitchen window was wide open. The latch hung crooked like someone had wedged a tool under it from outside, and the sill had fresh scuffs. I went room to room saying hello like an idiot, checking under the bed, inside the hall closet, even behind the shower curtain. Nothing was missing. No drawers riffled, no tracks on the rug, no smell except dust and old dish soap. Still, the sight of that mangled latch felt like someone had tapped my shoulder and ducked out of sight. I called the building manager and left a message, took 2 photos of the latch for my records, and I shut the window and wedged a sawed broom handle in the track. I didn't call the cops because it felt like I'd be reporting a hunch, and I figured if someone was testing the place, the visible stick might make them pick an easier target. That's the kind of logic you use when rent's high and shifts run late and you don't have the energy for paperwork. I made a sandwich, replayed my day twice, and told myself the latch probably snapped when I closed it in a rush that morning. By evening, I'd mostly convinced myself I'd overreacted. I put on a horror flick and ate cereal on the couch. Halfway through, this rhythmic creak started from the second floor. Slow, spaced out. Not pipes, not wind. Careful. I muted the TV and counted the intervals and thought it sounded exactly like someone testing a floorboard. I told myself old buildings talk like that, grabbed the mop like that would help, and went upstairs. Every room looked fine. Office, spare room. And then I noticed the bathroom window standing an inch open. I shut it, locked it, and slid a little screwdriver in the track. I went back down. The movie felt stupid again until the house made the exact same 3 creaks, and then went quiet, like it was listening to me breathe. At 3 in the morning, the hallway outside my bedroom started whispering. Not voices, footfalls. Heel to toe, light, deliberate. The knob on my bedroom door twitched once, twice, then a slow pressure like someone testing the lock. I said, "Who's there?" Quiet, because I didn't want them to know I was fully awake, and the knob stopped. My phone was already in my hand. I hit 911 and whispered that someone was inside, that a window had been pried earlier, that my door was locked and I could hear the steps. The dispatcher said, "Stay on the line. Officers are en route. Can you barricade?" I slid my dresser against the door with my shoulder and kept the call open. 2 more careful steps, then nothing. Then the soft pop of the front chain, then fast feet and the door banging wide. 2 minutes later, maybe less. Blue light washed the curtains, and I met 2 officers in the living room after they cleared it. They didn't find anyone inside. Front deadbolt thrown from the inside, chain hanging. But the pry marks on the kitchen window were as obvious as I'd thought. "You did right calling," one said. The other asked if I had an attic. "I never go up there. It's a low crawl space over the hall with a painted shut panel." He rapped the panel, and it knocked hollow. The paint line had been scored recently. They got a ladder from the patrol car and popped the access while I stood back with my hands wrapped around a mug I didn't remember making. The officer's flashlight found dust, insulation, then, "Got something," he said. He reached in and tugged down a black box about the size of a paperback with an antenna taped to it. A zip-tie bundle of cables, LEDs blinking steady like it had a pulse. It wasn't mine. I don't own anything with zip ties and electrical tape besides the bar fob on my keys. Crime scene rolled a van. A tech, Johnson, polite, matter of fact, gloved up, photographed the box on my kitchen table and cracked it open with a tiny screwdriver. He showed me the guts without touching anything critical, just enough for the class. Signal repeater with a directional antenna, he said, tapping near a radio board. Looks like a Wi-Fi booster married to a single-board computer. They run packet captures, tunnel it out, sometimes piggyback ransomware, carding, spoofed logins, that kind of thing. Install it where nobody looks and let the bill and the blame land here. Who is they? I asked, because I needed a face to hate. Johnson shrugged. Could be anyone who wants cover. Guys running stolen creds out of coffee shops, crews farming logins, even a neighbor's boyfriend who thinks he's smart. They'll pick apartments with predictable hours. He glanced at my jacket on the chair. You bartend? I nodded. The Cobra pin on the collar kind of answered for me. Right. Nights away, daytime sleep. Good schedule for maintenance visits. He turned the box and pointed to dust caked on a vent. Based on this, it's been up there a while. The officers went outside to check alley cams and knock on the rear unit. Johnson asked if I'd changed my Wi-Fi name lately. I said no. I used whatever the ISP set up because I never bothered. He nodded like that tracked and told me to call my provider first thing to swap the modem, get a fresh Mac, kill the old credentials, and then freeze anything financial. You'll get a detective, he added. We'll image this, see if it matches other installs. I asked if I should stay somewhere else. Tonight? Yeah. Leave the window rig and the front camera running in case they loop back. Now, before I explain what that did to my head, you need to understand the math of it. None of this was a one-off thrill or some weirdo following me because I pour a good whiskey. It was business. My apartment was a mask someone wore, so their crimes pointed at my address, my internet, my name if it came to that, and if the patrol car hadn't splashed blue across my windows when they bailed, I would have gone back to sleep, opened the bar for happy hour, and never known a black box in my attic had been humming along for months while somebody let themselves in between my shifts to keep it alive. Detectives came back the next morning with coffee breath and a stack of forms, and they did the slow, careful walkthrough again. Only this time they checked the other first-floor windows in my building, and 2 in the next one over. Same pry scars, same bent latches, same little crescent chips in the paint from a flat tool. One of them, Morales, said they'd seen a run of these in a different precinct last winter, but it never stuck to anybody because the devices were clean. They dusted mine anyway, then the attic panel, then the ladder, then the railing posts. Nothing. No prints, no hair, nothing but my own smudges and the fuzz from my dryer vent. Johnson from crime scene shot me a look like, see, pros keep it boring. They canvassed the neighbors and got exactly what you'd expect. Didn't hear anything. I work nights. I thought the creaking was the radiator. And from the older guy across the hall, we don't get that kind of trouble here. Which made everyone right for a second without speaking. By afternoon, they pulled footage from the building's crusty DVR in the laundry room and the corner deli's exterior cam. We watched a figure in a cap and mask slide past the alley door at 1:06 a.m., and then nothing for 10 minutes. And then a second figure doing the same exit but holding a grocery bag that didn't hang like groceries. The timestamps matched my Sunday double at Cobra. I clocked out at 1:12 that night. Morales tapped the screen. They plan around you, he said. They don't guess. Another detective, Quinn, buzzcut, patient, had pulled my social media on his phone and asked why my stories were so specific about shifts. I said they weren't that specific. He tilted the screen and scrolled. A boomerang of the closing bell, me captioning, Last call at 1, please don't be weird. A shot of the specials board at 5:03, a throwaway from my manager tagging me in the Saturday lineup. It's patterning, Quinn said. Not mean. Just the way you say someone left a door open. They walk your schedule against the cameras and your lights, and they get a window, Morales added. Only your random day off blocked them tonight. We stood in the kitchen like we were waiting for someone to knock again. So, what are we talking, kids? I asked. And I knew how I sounded, but I needed scale. Johnson shook his head. Not kids. Gloves, no prints, device flashed with a clean image, Mac spoofed, SD card swapped. They're disciplined, and they don't take trophies. They're not here for your TV. He pointed at the kitchen table where the black box sat in an evidence bag now. It's business. He said they'd push a bolo to pawn and scrap for anybody moving lots of network gear, talk to providers, check similar installs, all the right phrases that don't fix a latch. They asked for consent to take the device, and I signed because what else do you do? They left me with a temporary screw plate for the window and a yellow copy of the incident report, and told me to get a locksmith out today, not tomorrow. Don't sleep here until you can control entry, Morales said, and gave me a card with his cell. Text when you're back home, make us earn the paycheck. I did the list the way you do reps because counting is easier than thinking. New deadbolts on front and back. I added window pin locks so you need a key even if you cut the latch. The alarm guy put door sensors and a motion by the stairs and walked me through keypad codes. I picked boring numbers and changed them 3 times because paranoia feels smart when you're tired. I swapped to a different internet provider and told them bridge mode only, no Wi-Fi. And I bought my own router and wiped it myself and set a long pass I didn't reuse. I made my socials private, killed the stories, asked my manager to stop tagging me on the schedule, and told 2 coworkers I was fine, but I'd Uber home now, and yes, that was dumb expensive, but cheaper than whatever the alternative was. I slept on my sister's couch for 4 nights with a bag under my knees and texted Morales when I finally unlocked my door again. He replied, "Got it." 3 months in, the follow-ups dried up to a quarterly call and then a voicemail. 6 months in, I had money saved and a friend moving out on the other side of town, top floor, no alley access, the kind of building with mailboxes inside and an auto lock that actually auto locks. I hired movers, kept the load covered, and I put my name on the buzzer under just an initial. I still open the attic hatch every couple months with a flashlight and a chair, and I still close windows even when it's stuffy, 'cause that's the habit now. The case closed with no arrests. Quinn said they'd link a few jobs by method, but nothing you can put a person on. And I think about the device bagged on my table and the creaks on the stairs and the way the knob turned twice like a test. And I wonder which apartment took my place, and if someone else is asleep under a quiet hum they pay for, because modern burglars don't always take your stuff. Sometimes they turn your address into theirs and let your life carry it.